FBI detective, this video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 351, The Dagger is Sharp. Sniper. The third person appeared on the platform where there were originally two people. The hook-nosed man had his neck broken and lost his breath. The muzzle of the man with the scar on the corner of his eye was already aimed at Luo An, who suddenly appeared. Just when he was about to pull the trigger, Luo An was faster than him. He grabbed the pistol with his right hand and pressed it down. At the same time, his left hand took away the dagger that was stabbing at him from the hook-nosed man's hand and slashed it towards the finger of the man with the scar on the corner of his eye holding the gun. Swish, a flash of white light passed by, and the man with the scar on the corner of his eye immediately took a breath of cold air and then looked at his right hand with two fingers missing and cried out in pain, "Son of." The man with the scar on the corner of his eye subconsciously loosened his hand after his fingers were cut off. Luo An took advantage of the situation to grab the pistol and smashed it hard into the temple of the man with the scar on the corner of his eye. Bang, the temple was hit hard, and the man with the scar on the corner of his eye bulged his eyes and fell to the side uncontrollably, and the greeting in his mouth also stopped. At the moment of falling, the man with scar on the corner of his eye, who was still clear-headed, endured the pain and immediately took out another dagger and stabbed forward with force. At the same time, he opened his mouth and prepared to shout loudly to attract the attention of those inside the factory. Swish. The next second, a familiar white light flashed before his eyes. The man with scar on the corner of his eye suddenly felt a sharp pain in his neck. His body shook and twitched uncontrollably. He wanted to breathe and speak, but had no strength. Luo An, who took away the dagger from the man with scar on the corner of his eye and sent him and the hook nose into a deep sleep, breathed a sigh of relief. The action of killing the two men just now was actually very fast, and it took only a few seconds. However, in order to prevent the enemy from discovering the abnormality here, he still ignored the red liquid on the platform and quickly lay down. The dagger is very sharp, thank you. Putting the dagger into the pocket on his thigh, Luo An took the SR-25 from the hook nose and began to observe the situation inside the factory carefully. Through the SR-25 scope, Roan discovered that the north and south gates of the number 3 plant were guarded by 4 guys wearing bulletproof vests, holding rifles, and wearing hoods and shirts, so that their faces could not be seen clearly. There were also many people inside the factory. In addition to a young man in a suit holding a pistol, a man holding a rifle, and wearing a black hood, there were 6 guys holding rifles, and dressed the same as the guards outside. 2 of the 6 guys were shot in the arms and legs, and some simple hemostasis treatment was performed. In the north of the factory, there were 2 chairs facing each other. On one of the chairs sat John Rodriguez, who had his hands and feet tied, a lot of bruises and blood on his face, and was also shot in the arm. Now 2 guys were walking towards John. Combined with the words just heard from the intercom, Roan judged that this group of people should be preparing to carry John and evacuate the place first, and the sniper and observer on the high platform would leave last. Roan could understand that John was captured. After all, the other side was outnumbered. What Roan didn't understand was that he took a careful look around with a sniper rifle and didn't see the figure of the little girl Kara at all. Is Kara not here at all? Or has she been taken away by this group of people in advance? Luo An didn't understand whether John had seen Kara or not, or whether Kara was here or not. However, the enemy was already preparing to retreat and leave. It was not the time to continue speculating on this matter. Luo An immediately pressed the communicator and asked, "Lassie, how are you doing?" "Luo An, did you succeed?" Hearing that there was no problem with Luo An's tone of voice, Lassie, who had been worried for a long time, breathed a sigh of relief and quickly replied, "I'm fine. The enemy hasn't found me." "Very good." Luo An adjusted the channel and continued to ask, "Where is the SWAT team now?" "We have arrived at the designated location outside the industrial park." The voice of one of the SWAT team captains came from the communicator. "What specific action should we take next?" "It is estimated that there are 16 enemies and 1 hostage." The left and right teams will fully surround the number 3 factory in the industrial park. Act quickly. Luo An didn't waste any words and said directly, the enemy has rifles and bulletproof vests. Be careful. Understood. The SWAT captain waved his hand. Action. Action. Move forward quickly. Go go go. A group of SWAT team members immediately rushed towards the target location with rifles. Seeing this, Wanda, whose situation had improved a lot, was about to take out his cell phone to make a call, but he found that Michelle, holding a gun, was standing closely beside him and had no intention of moving with the SWAT team. Wanda frowned slightly and walked to the other side of the sub with his cell phone. Then Michelle came to his side with a weapon in hand without saying a word. Without saying a word, he looked at Wanda quietly with a standard smile showing 8 teeth in the federal style. Wanda. Roan didn't care about Wanda's depressed mood outside the industrial park. The noise made by the SWAT team members when they were moving was not small, and everyone in factory number 3 had already discovered something was wrong. The young man turned his head to look at the man with a black hood beside him. The man with the black hood waved his hand, signaling the people behind him to protect the young man and John in the middle, then picked up the walkie-talkie and asked as he walked, Antonio, what happened? On the high platform, Roan tilted his head slightly when he heard the voice coming from the walkie-talkie. He didn't know which of the two bodies this Antonio was, but it didn't matter which one it was. He slowed down his breathing, aimed the SR-25 at the target, and Roan pulled the trigger directly. Bang! A dull gunshot sounded from the high platform. Before the black hooded man finished speaking, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his right shoulder, and then fell backwards uncontrollably. Sniper. Dodge. Antonio betrayed. *% idiot. It's obvious that Antonio was killed. It was definitely not him who shot. The moment the black hooded man was shot and fell to the ground, the suit man subconsciously shrank his head and squatted on the ground. A dozen guys whose faces could not be seen shouted loudly, shooting at the commanding heights, while the others immediately pulled the suit man, John and the hooded man to quickly hide behind obstacles. At this moment, the SWAT team and Lassie also arrived here and pulled the trigger at them without saying a word. There are enemies behind. Watch out for the side. The side. Bang 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 bang. 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 Left. Left. Surround quickly. Understood. The two teams are fully armed. SWAT members immediately exchanged fire with the dozen guys in shirts and hoods. The gunshots were chaotic and deafening, and the battle was very intense. Bang bang bang. Roan on the high platform shot at the guys with shirts and hoods with their heads exposed one by one, and soon killed 3 guys who cared less about their heads and their butts. Although these guys in shirts and hoods had excellent weapons and protective gear, their skills were average after all, and they were soon beaten back by the experienced and orderly SWAT members. Seeing that more than half of his men were killed or wounded, the hooded man immediately endured the severe pain in his right shoulder, stretched out his left hand to grab one of his men, and shouted coldly, Jose, take people to cover their retreat. The hooded man mentioned was the young man in a suit and the captured John. But you. The guy named Jose was stunned and hesitated. The hooded man immediately kicked him hard and yelled, follow my orders. Retreat. The guy named Jose was kicked, looked at the black hooded man deeply, and then pulled the 2 teammates around him. Jose dragged the young man in a suit, and the 2 teammates carried John and quickly broke through in the direction that the SWAT team had not yet controlled. On the other side, Roan carried the SR-25 and moved slowly from the high platform to the ground. Chapter 352. You are holding him hostage. Why are you asking us to give way? The southeast side of factory number 3 was the direction that the SWAT team had not blocked in time. John Rodriguez, who was bruised and swollen, was carried on the shoulders of 2 guys with shirts on his head and whose faces could not be seen clearly. He looked at the young man in a suit holding a pistol, walking quickly behind Jose with a solemn expression and laughed. Fahad, look at what you look like now. You look even more miserable than your father before he died. Upon hearing this, the young man in a suit, Fahad, glanced at John coldly and said nothing, but in his heart he had already made up his mind to turn around and tie John up and let him watch his flesh being cut off bit by bit. Seeing that Fahad did not reply, John, who was bruised and swollen, smiled even more and cursed even more happily. On the other side, the guys with shirts on their heads at the end of factory number 3 had all been shot dead by the SWAT team. Only the man with a black hood and 2 guys with shirts on their heads were left, hiding in a corner inside factory number 4 and resisting stubbornly. Seeing several SWAT members start to study how to attack the last few enemies, Lassie, who had killed 2 enemies, put down her rifle, breathed a sigh of relief, then pressed the communicator and said, "Roan, how are you doing? We didn't find the young man and John you mentioned before. Group A SWAT has gone to hunt them down, based on the traces. I'm fine. By the way, you asked 2 SWAT members to go to that high platform to deal with the bodies." Roan stood on a slightly higher place with the SR-25, looking at the 5 people of Fahad who were fleeing quickly, and the SWAT members of Group A who were not too far away from them, and said with a smile, "Then come to the back of factory number 6. I have found John and the others." After saying that, Roan turned off the communicator, stomped his right foot on the ground, and carried the SR-25 like lightning towards the direction where Fahad and the others were fleeing. Bang! A few seconds later, just as the 5 people of Fahad were running forward quickly, a muffled gunshot suddenly came, and one of the guys who was carrying John's shirt over his head was immediately shot in the middle of his eyebrows, and his legs softened, and he fell down. Bang! John, who lost part of his support, fell to the ground, and his face landed first. John, Z10. The remaining Fahad and Jose were startled by the sudden gunshot and hurriedly hid behind the last bunker beside them. Bang! The remaining guy with a shirt pulled over his head had just thrown John to the 2 of them, and there was another muffled gunshot not far in front of them, and then the guy with the hole in his temple closed his eyes forever. After successfully killing 2 enemies, Roan's eyes lit up slightly behind a bunker, and he shook the SR-25 in his hand vigorously. No wonder the hawk nose was so happy to get the SR-25. The accuracy, reliability, and adaptability of this gun are indeed extraordinary. It is comfortable to use. After checking the magazine and finding that there are still 10 bullets left in the SR-25, Roan breathed a sigh of relief. Using the emotional perception in his mind, Roan found the 3 emotional objects closest to him, judged the hiding position of the other party, took a deep breath, and immediately moved to the other side like lightning. I found him. The moment Roan moved quickly, Jose, who had been preparing for a long time, immediately spotted him, raised his rifle, and pulled the trigger. Bang, 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 they are here. On the other side, Lassie, who had caught up quickly, and the SWAT team members of Group A also arrived here. Seeing Jose's back with a gun, they immediately raised their guns, and prepared to shoot behind Jose, Fahad and John. Bang! The next second, before the SWAT team members of Group A could fire, a muffled gunshot suddenly sounded, followed by Jose, who was shocked and didn't understand why Roan was so fast, and with a bullet hole in the middle of his forehead, his gun fell to the ground and his body softened. The SWAT team members of Group A who saw Roan shooting were full of disbelief, and Lassie was also shocked. She felt that Roan's reaction speed was getting faster and faster. But now was not the time to discuss this matter. They immediately raised their guns and aimed at the last enemy, Fahad. *%. Seeing the SWAT team members of Group A chasing behind him and Roan blocking the road in front, Fahad, who had only a pistol in his hand and had just fired a few bullets, looked extremely unhappy. Ha ha ha. John, who was lying on the ground, grinned and was about to continue to taunt him, but Fahad immediately grabbed John's collar and pulled him up from the ground. Fahad hid behind John, holding his gun to John's temple, and slowly retreated to the left of Roan and the right of Lassie and the SWAT team members, gradually leaning against the wall of the abandoned factory, and then shouted to everyone present, "Don't come over. Otherwise I will shoot him. Make way for me. Let me leave." Lassie and the SWAT team members of Group A frowned. John swallowed his saliva and said nothing. Roan held the SR-25 and smiled calmly. "You are holding him hostage. Why are you asking us to make way?" Hearing Roan's words, Lassie and the SWAT team members of Group A were stunned, and John, who was held hostage, widened his eyes in shock. Fahad was stunned and at a loss. The intuition in his head told him that in a sense, Roan's words were not wrong, and they made sense. "No, you." Bang. Fahad was stunned for a few seconds and was about to continue shouting when a familiar muffled gunshot rang out again, followed by an unbearable pain in his right hand. While Fahad didn't react, Roan shot Fahad's right hand off, then moved to John like a ghost, snatched the pistol, and kicked Fahad out with a kick. Bang! Fahad fell to the ground hard. Seeing the dust stirred up, the SWAT team members of Group A rushed forward and took out handcuffs to lock Fahad's hands and feet tightly. Looking at John with a bruised face, Roan raised the corner of his mouth and asked with a smile, "Are you okay, Mr. Rodriguez?" "I'm fine." John felt like his heart was on a roller coaster. He was stiff for several seconds before he slowly shook his head and answered Roan's question, then reached out and grabbed Roan's hands, expressing his gratitude to him sincerely. "Roan." At this moment, Lassie nodded on the contact group, then walked over and said, "The battle inside factory number 4 has ended. The SWAT team killed an enemy and captured 2 guys who tried to commit suicide. One of them was wearing a black hood and was suspected to be the leader of this group of shirt-covered guys." "Well done." Roan nodded, calmly pulled his hand out of John's hand, and then, in the admiring eyes of the SWAT team members of Group A, began to briefly explain the follow-up of today's operation. After the order was narrated, Lassie and the SWAT team members of Group A took Fahad away from here to stop the bleeding. Roan and John walked behind and asked solemnly, "John, what happened today? And where is your daughter Kara now?" Hearing Roan's question, John Rodriguez's face changed and he sighed. On the other side, outside the industrial park, looking at Michelle, who was holding a weapon in her hand and followed him wherever he went, and she didn't answer anything he asked, Wanda's mouth twitched and his face was speechless. Chapter 353 Belize. Interrogation. Special Investigation Team, Office Area, 20 hours after Kara's disappearance. In the 3 interrogation rooms, the young man in a suit, Fahad, who had just treated his wound, the man in the black hood, whose name was Maxwell, and John Rodriguez, who had caused a little trouble for their special investigation team, were detained. John's boss, Wanda, was sent by Roan to the office of Potent Burn, the team leader. After all, this case was handed over to the special investigation team by Potent Burn. Now Roan wanted to interrogate John Rodriguez alone, so he naturally needed to ask Potent Burn, who was higher in rank than him, to help deal with John's boss. Roan first entered the interrogation room where John was. He poured a cup of coffee and pushed it in front of John. "Tell me, what happened today? This is a revenge trap against me." Taking a sip of coffee, John, with a bruised face, smiled bitterly and explained, "Fahad and his men are actually related to an operation I have handled before." According to John, there were some problems in the internal environment of Belize a few years ago. In order to protect a certain Liberal Democratic gang, they helped weaken the rival gang of the Liberal Democratic Party. Fahad is the son of a high-ranking member of the rival gang. After listening to John's narration, Roan's expression remained unchanged, but he was a little confused. The reason for the confusion was not that the mission mentioned by John was different from the mission mentioned by Wand before, but it could even be said that they were completely opposite. After all, Roan had long thought that Wand was full of lies and would most likely lie to him. The real reason that made Roan confused was, where is Belize? It was not until Roan thought about it for a long time and recalled the map of America in his mind that he remembered that Belize was a very small country located below Mexico and above Panama, and the official language of the country was still English. Roan nodded calmly. The Federation has always regarded America as its own backyard. Except for a cesspool called Haiti, the rest of America has the shadow of CIA making trouble. As long as the government of a country is not free and democratic, the CIA will bring freedom and democracy to this country. What John said is very reasonable. Roan has no opinion on the conflict between John and Fahad. Anyway, after this incident, John will definitely be censored, targeted, and suppressed by the CIA because of his experience of being captured this time. Luo An now just wanted to know what happened to Kara, and John continued, "Alan called me and told me about Kara's disappearance. Soon after, I received a call. The person on the other end of the phone first sent me a photo of Kara, saying that Kara was in their hands, and asked me to go to meet them alone with $5 million. For my daughter, I agreed to their request. Hearing this, Luo An thought about most of John's previous actions. After thinking about it, he raised his eyebrows and asked in confusion, "Did you see Kara after arriving at the abandoned industrial park?" As a professional CIA, John could not have rushed to the enemy's location alone without seeing and confirming his daughter. Sure enough, John nodded and said in a deep voice, "After arriving at the industrial park, a guy in the group with a shirt on his head and a face that could not be seen clearly gave me a real-time video of Kara's situation. I talked to Kara for a few words, confirmed that the video was not recorded, and Kara was fine, and then I entered the factory. Then John was beaten up by the enemy and exchanged fire with the enemy. John was alone after all, and was soon captured by the other party. When he saw Fahad appear in front of him, John finally understood who was behind the trap." Luo An took out a small notebook and wrote down John's words. After pondering for a few seconds, he looked up and asked, "So, you didn't see Kara inside the abandoned industrial park at all, right?" John nodded silently, so he said before that this was a trap designed specifically for him. After asking John some questions again, Luo An made sure that the other party did not lie about the key nodes and main details, and then he stood up and left the meeting room. Pushing open the door of the interrogation room and walking into the office area, Roan picked up the teacup and took a sip, then asked in a deep voice, "Mona, Michelle, how are you investigating the black book car that the drug addict Dagny Moses mentioned not long ago?" Hearing this, Mona leaned back in her chair and spread her hands. "Sorry, I found nothing. I couldn't find any clues about the car at all." Lassie shook the information in her hand. "These are the information of the vehicles rented by Fahad and his group in the past few days. Isn't this information helpful at all?" "No." Michelle shook her head, and Mona explained, "None of these cars are the book sedans driven by the kidnapper who kidnapped Kara. This means that either Fahad and his group used other cars that we haven't found yet to kidnap Kara, or," Roan took over Mona's words, "either the real murderer who kidnapped Kara is not Fahad and his group." "That's right." Mona and Michelle agreed deeply, while Lassie frowned. But John had a video chat with Kara at the abandoned industrial park, which means they are definitely connected to the people who kidnapped Kara, and the guns and equipment of this group of people are not ordinary. Roan briefly described the situation described by John and the state of the enemies during the operation. After thinking for a while, he asked, "Mona, have you found out the true identities of Fahad and Maxwell?" "Of course." Mona tapped on the keyboard with 10 fingers, and Roan leaned over to take a look. The content displayed on the computer was similar to what John said. Fahad's father was the main person in charge of a gang in Belize. Maxwell was the most trusted subordinate and D-head member of Fahad's father, and Fahad himself had always been regarded as the successor of this gang. Since its establishment, the gang has been using physical persuasion against the people in Belize, but because it has never touched the bottom line of the Federation has never paid attention to them. Until Belize's father began to target the Federation for some unknown reason, the CIA headed by John immediately went out to support an opposing gang. Although this rival gang also used high-pressure tactics against Belize. Throughout the story, there is no real good person among Belize's father, the rival gang, and the CIA headed by John. When Fahad came to seek revenge on John, it was also a case of revenge after the fact. Okay. After briefly reading the information about Fahad and Maxwell, Roan raised his head and drank the tea in the cup, stood up and walked towards the interrogation room. "Lassie, come with me to see the mental journey of the Avengers." "Okay." Lassie smiled and immediately followed with a small notebook. In the interrogation room, the young Fahad had his right hand wrapped in bandages, his left hand was handcuffed to the interrogation table, and his feet were also handcuffed together. He sat on the chair with an expressionless face, just looking at Roan and Lassie quietly. "Hello, Mr. Avenger." Luo An handed him a cup of coffee, sat down on the interrogation table, looked down at Fahad, and asked with a smile, "The information we found shows that your father died at the hands of Belizeans. What do you think about this death?" Hearing this, Fahad's eyes instantly turned red. Luo An smiled slightly. "In interrogation, you don't have to worry about the interrogator's anger, but you have to worry about the interrogator not moving." Coincidentally, Luo An has many ways to make Fahad, a stubborn person who has done a lot of evil, Feel emotional. Here comes the 4th update. The boss is not doing his job T. The 11th day has just passed, and he has started to torment me again. Chapter 354. Interrogation Principles. Discovery in the interrogation room. Special Investigation Team. Interrogation room. Although Fahad had been a gambler, treated ordinary people like grass, killed many people, and raped women, he knew that he was a good man and always regarded his father as his idol. So when he heard Luo An talking about his father, Fahad's eyes suddenly flashed with coldness, and he wanted to kill Luo An on the spot. The look is so sharp. But unfortunately, the look can't kill, so John is still alive and well. Luo An didn't care about the look of a guy who was destined to go to prison. He left the interrogation table and sat back in his chair. Luo An crossed his legs and asked directly, "Fahad, I'm too lazy to talk nonsense with you. Let's make a deal. Tell me who kidnapped the little girl Kara and where they are now. When the court opens, I will tell the judge about your cooperation with our interrogation." Thinking that Luo An was just talking nonsense, Fahad sneered and said, "I want to see a lawyer. I won't answer any of your questions until the lawyer arrives. Do you think a lawyer can help you clear the charges?" Luo An laughed and said, "You kidnapped and blackmailed John with a group of armed thugs. You have committed a lot of serious crimes such as violent injury and illegal possession of firearms, which have been perfectly combined with you. It is very likely that you will also be awarded the title of a terrorist. In this case, what can a lawyer do to help you? The judge is kind to you to be able to enter Pelican Bay Prison. Pelican Bay Prison, California's Tomb of the Living Dead. In order to prevent prisoners from forming cliques and causing chaos, Pelican Bay Prison implements complete isolation and detention. Everyone must be alone in a room with only a small door, no windows, and only 2 square meters in size. The prisoners are imprisoned for more than 22 hours a day. Except for the prison guards who deliver meals, they can't see anyone at all. After listening to Roan's words, Fahad pondered for a few seconds and suddenly slammed his bandaged right hand against the interrogation table. Bang! With a muffled sound, the wound on his right hand that had been shot before instantly burst, and blood flowed again, soon dyeing the bandage on it red. Fahad's right arm was shaking uncontrollably due to the pain. Then he looked up at Roan and said coldly, "Mr. FBI, I'm injured. According to federal law, I have the right to request a suspension of the interrogation and ask the doctor to treat me." Lassie was startled by Fahad's action, and her face suddenly became extremely ugly. She subconsciously turned her head to look at Roan, but found that Roan was still sitting on the chair with his legs crossed, and the smile on his face did not change at all. Feeling Lassie's gaze, Roan gave her a reassuring look, then slowly stood up and said indifferently, "Fahad, have you ever thought about a question? Why didn't I ask someone to handcuff your injured right hand?" Fahad's eyebrows jumped when he heard this, and suddenly he had a bad premonition. As expected, Luo An continued, "Even if you get yourself injured again, you have to stop the interrogation. This situation can only mean 2 things." Luo An spoke slowly. Lassie looked up with a puzzled look in her eyes, waiting for the next words, and Fahad also endured the pain, staring at Luo An waiting for him to say the 2 questions he had mentioned. Then, Luo An chuckled and changed the subject. "Lassie, stop the interrogation. Help Fahad call a doctor. Don't let people say we don't respect human rights." After saying that, Luo An smiled at Fahad, opened the door of the interrogation room, and walked out slowly. X2 seeing the closed door of the interrogation room, Lassie's mouth twitched, but she still hurriedly got up to execute Luo An's order. Fahad's face darkened instantly. The pain in his hand was just a small matter. The key was what Luo An had guessed. He hated the feeling of saying half of something the most. Thinking of what Roan had just said, and the look he gave him at the end, Fahad's mind was filled with 1,000 thoughts. He was in a state of uncertainty and restlessness. In the corridor, Roan left the interrogation room where Fahad was, but instead of returning to the office area, he waved to Michelle and went with her into the interrogation room where the man in the black hood, Maxwell, was. 10 minutes later, the doctor simply treated Fahad's wound. Lassie sent the doctor away, and just as she returned to the office area, she saw Roan and Michelle coming out of the interrogation room where Maxwell was. "How is it?" Lassie hurried over and asked, "Did you get any useful clues?" No clues. Maxwell didn't say a word. Michelle handed the interrogation record to Lassie, which was full of Roan's words, and there were ellipsis marks under Maxwell. Okay. Lassie threw the useless interrogation record aside and continued to ask the question that had been lingering in her mind for a long time. Roan, what did you mean by what you said to Fahad just now? 2 guesses. Although Maxwell has not replied, his expression has helped me verify these 2 guesses. Roan sat on the chair and said that there are 4 major principles for interrogation, called the RAT principle. An abbreviation. RAT is also mice, which represents the 4 most useful breakthroughs: money, ideology, coercion, and ego. When encountering someone with firm beliefs, use I and E, and when encountering someone with unsteady beliefs, use M and C. When interrogating Fahad and Maxwell just now, Roan found that these 2 people's beliefs are very firm. Of course, based on the life experiences of these 2 people, their beliefs can never be any ideology or doctrine. The only possibility is that someone has made a guarantee to them after the action fails. During the interrogation of Fahad and Maxwell, I mentioned John. Facing the puzzled eyes of Mona, Lassie and Michelle, Roan explained, but the expressions on the faces of these 2 people only showed the frustration of failure and resentment towards us, but not the disappointment of not being able to continue to carry out actions against John in the future. And when I talked about the court and the prison, the expressions of these 2 people did not change at all. It seems that they don't care at all. Hearing this, Mona and Lassie suddenly realized, you mean, Fahad and Maxwell actually have a backup plan. And the implementer of this backup plan is the mastermind who provided them with weapons and equipment. He is also the one who kidnapped Kara. That's right. But what will this mastermind do? Michelle scratched his head and raised 2 questions of his own. And how can Fahad and Maxwell guarantee that the mastermind did not lie to them? The probability of jailbreaking is not high, and those prisons are not vegetarians. But in the process of escorting prisoners, there are many opportunities to take action. Roan picked up the teacup and took a sip. After pondering for a few seconds, he continued, as for the second question, it is our next investigation target. Who is the mastermind behind this? What is his relationship with these 2 guys? Lassie, contact the Federal Customs and Border Protection in the Department of Homeland Security and make sure to find out how this large group of people entered the Federation. Mona, Michelle, you carefully investigate the consumption, residence and other information of this group of people in the Federation and make sure to find out who the mastermind behind this is. Okay, no problem. Seeing the 3 women start to get busy, Luo An put down his teacup and nodded with satisfaction. This way, we can investigate the case and get in touch with other federal law enforcement agencies, killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Of course, the 3 of them are working, and Luo An can't just sit there and watch the show. He turned on the computer and found an extra folder on the desktop. He asked puzzledly, Mona, what is this? Chapter 355, Biological Knowledge. Who are Kara's parents? This is the investigation of the Black Book sedan, and a little thing I found in Madeline's computer when you were interrogating the prisoner just now. Mona didn't even raise her head to Roan's question. She answered while typing on her computer keyboard. I haven't looked at the contents in detail, but I took a rough look and found that they are all photos and videos. Okay. Roan nodded and began to carefully check the surveillance footage near Alan's house, trying to find traces of the suspicious Black Book car. But unfortunately, after a period of time, Roan found nothing. It seems that the kidnappers are very familiar with the surveillance footage near Madeline's house. Roan whispered to himself, thought silently for a few seconds, and began to check the photos and videos mentioned by Mona. The photos and videos were very messy. The scenes in them included not only Kara and Madeline's life photos, travel photos, and play videos, but also surveillance records of the nanny taking care of Kara. Roan judged that this should be secretly recorded by Madeline when she was investigating the nanny to prevent the nanny from misbehaving. Scrolling down, John's shadow gradually appeared in the photos and videos. Considering that the real target of Fahad's group was John, Roan began to check carefully to see if there was any useful clue in the video. Most of the photos and videos were about the life and travel records of Madeline and John. It can be seen that they have a good relationship. There are even several intimate videos of the couple. Roan was about to close the video with a frown on his face, but suddenly frowned. He found some problems. Roan, the federal customs. At this moment, Lassie came over with a folder. Seeing the video scene in Roan's computer, she raised the corner of her mouth. It's not a good thing to peek into the privacy of the person who reported the case. Don't joke, you know that's not what I meant. Roan glared at Lassie, then asked in a serious voice with a deep face, let me ask you a question. When was Kara born? July 23rd. The time was 1999. Lassie always remembered the basic information of the missing person very clearly. After answering Roan's question, she asked in confusion, what's wrong? But the time in the video is March 1999. Roan pointed to the time recorded in the corner of the video in the computer, clasped his hands, and said in a light voice, pregnant women can indeed have appropriate intimate activities with their husbands during pregnancy, but Ms. Madeline in the video has a very flat belly. Wow. Lassie hurried back to her seat to check Kara's basic information. After making sure that she was right, Roan also pulled Mona over and asked her to check whether the video had any signs of being tampered with. After confirming that both clues were normal, Mona and Michelle were very surprised. So, Kara is not actually John and Madeline's child? Lassie spread her hands. Physiologically speaking, it is impossible for a pregnant woman to become thin and still have some abdominal muscles before the child is born. This is not physiology, it's common sense. Roan drank the tea in the cup, left the chair, and walked into the interrogation room, where John was with Lassie. We have checked. There is no record of Kara being adopted, which means she is not an orphan. Roan showed John the screenshot of the video, and Lassie asked, can you explain it? Because no matter from the perspective of physiology or any other science, Kara cannot be your biological daughter. Kara is my biological daughter. John glared at Lassie fiercely, and seeing the look in Roan's eyes, he was silent for a long time and said, at that time, I needed to leave the Federation to perform a mission, so I told Madeline that I wanted a child. Madeline loved me very much, and she agreed, but we tried many methods but failed. Finally, the doctor told us that Madeline's eggs had congenital problems and she would never be able to conceive in this life. After listening to John's narration, Lassie did not speak, and Roan continued to ask, then how did Kara come from? Surrogate. With rhyme, John sighed and continued, after learning that there was something wrong with her body, Madeline's emotions fluctuated greatly. She loved me very much, so she made this suggestion. Surrogate is illegal in many countries in the world. After all, it involves many ethical issues. However, the Federation is several versions ahead of other countries in the world. This matter is legal and compliant in many states of the Federation, and these states have also established special legal provisions and bases to protect the interests of both parties. Lassie thought for a while and asked, is it physical contact? Or test tube? Of course it is a test tube. John's eyes widened immediately. I love Madeline. I have never betrayed her. Okay. Roan patted Lassie's arm and finally asked, who is the woman who provided the egg and uterus? What's her name? Her name is Belva. She is a college student. John did not hesitate and directly said the other party's name and the reason for doing so. She agreed to surrogate, mainly to earn tuition for college. Roan was a little speechless. The tuition fees of universities in the Federation are indeed the eternal pain of ordinary people in the Federation. As far as ordinary public universities in the Federation are concerned, children from ordinary families have only two choices, either to pay $30,000 to $50,000 for tuition every semester, or to apply for college student loans. The federal college student loan is world famous. If nothing goes wrong, as long as the application is successful, you will need to spend the rest of your life to pay it back. The most famous thing is that a certain president did not pay off his college student loan until he became the official president, and it took him 21 years to pay it back. Many college students have used various methods to solve this student loan, and there are many independent ones. But Belva is dead. Just as Roan wrote down this name and planned to check it back, John continued to add, when Kara was 1.5 years old, Madeline and I got news from the agent that Belva encountered a car accident on the way home from college and died on the spot. What unfortunate news. Lassie frowned when she heard this, and Roan's writing action also paused slightly, and some ideas in his mind were temporarily put aside. He continued to ask John some questions. Roan and Lassie had just walked out of the interrogation room when the team leader Potent Burn and John's boss Wanda walked into the special investigation team office one after another. "Thank you for your hard work." Potent Burn nodded to the busy Mona and Michelle, then walked to Roan and asked, "How's John Rodriguez going?" Roan gave Lassie a look. Seeing this, Lassie immediately took the interrogation record and walked over to investigate the situation of Belva with Mona. Roan glanced at Wanda behind Potent Vine and asked with a smile, "The investigation is not yet complete. After all, John is the father of the missing person Kara, and we still need his help in many things." Potent Vine frowned slightly and said nothing, while Wanda walked forward quickly. Just as he was about to speak, Mona and Lassie on the side suddenly raised their hands and said loudly, "Roan, we have a discovery here." Chapter 356 Negotiations with Wanda, Gains and Problems. Special Investigation Team, Office Area. Hearing what Mona and Lassie said, Roan did not rush over to check the situation, but smiled and looked at Wanda and asked, "Mr. Wanda, do you have any questions?" Wanda had a blank expression on his face and said directly, "We have some questions to ask John, so." "Okay, no problem." Before Wanda finished speaking, Roan laughed and nodded. "John is in the interrogation room now. The interrogation room can be lent to you for use, as long as you want." Seeing Roan pretending to be confused, the team leader Potent Burn raised the corner of his mouth slightly and did not speak. Wanda's eyebrows trembled, took a deep breath calmly, and continued, "I need to take John back to the CIA temporarily. So that's it." Roan showed an expression of sudden enlightenment on his face, and then shook his head in Wanda's unblinking eyes. "No, it's temporary now, but it may not be the case when the person is in their hands." Roan didn't care about Wanda's gloomy face at all, and pretended not to see it. Judging from Fahad and Maxwell in the other two interrogation rooms, this kidnapping and murder case was obviously a case of retaliation by the CIA, who was chasing them into the Federation after they were involved in something outside the Federation. To put it bluntly, this case was simply Roan's special investigation team cleaning up their CIA's mess. Cleaning up their messes was fine, but now Wanda wanted to take away John Rodriguez, who was in his hand, just by opening his mouth. Roan snorted in his heart. There was no such good thing in the world, and the special investigation team didn't have the habit of suffering a loss is a blessing. Roan said that he was short-sighted and that such a great blessing should be left to others. Wanda had no good way to deal with Roan, who refused to give in. It was simply unrealistic to rob people by force. Originally, Wanda had planned to persuade Potent Burn to order Roan to release the person, but Potent Burn was even more of an old fox. If Wanda hadn't reacted quickly, he would probably have been led into a ditch by Potent Burn. After a long silence, Wanda walked to Luo An and whispered, "I heard that Washington is going to inspect you, the heads of the special investigation team, in the near future. Through the cooperation in this case, we at the CIA feel that you, Luo An, are very capable in all aspects, and can be promoted to the official leader of the investigation team." Wanda said that he could support Washington in helping Luo An to become a regular employee. Luo An smiled and said, "Thank you, CIA, for your evaluation of me. But I believe that most of the FBI superiors have seen my ability very clearly, so I won't bother you to help me." Holding Veronis's thigh, relying on Mr. Clement's support, and relying on his performance in so many cases, Luo An didn't dare to say that he would be promoted to the leader of the special investigation team 100%, but the probability was at least 90%. In this case, is it necessary for Wanda, the CIA, to come forward to help? Is this the special investigation team of the FBI, or the special investigation team of their CIA? What's more, the CIA has always been known for its lying nature and rapid change of face, and Luo An doesn't believe their empty words. The Speaker of the Federal Parliament, who was cheated by an old witch in the future, is a living example. Wand, who understood the subtext of Luo An's words, did not change his expression. He then said a few empty words. Seeing Luo An continued to shake his head and refused to listen, he finally frowned and asked, "I don't know what Deputy Team Leader Greenwood means." He was called Luo An just now, but now he is Deputy Team Leader Greenwood. Luo An glanced at Wand calmly and said, in order to investigate this case, our special investigation team's bus was damaged in many places and can hardly be used. A lot of equipment in the equipment warehouse was also lost. Those that were not lost were all old weapons and equipment that were about to be eliminated. Luo An said a lot, but the meaning of his words was very simple. I want a new car. I want new equipment. It is unrealistic to ask for money directly. It is impossible for Wand to take money out of his own pocket, and it is even more impossible to use the CIA's public account. So instead of asking for money, it is better to change the form of money, which sounds good on the surface and has a higher success rate. Thinking of the stuff he had ridden in not long ago, and the equipment and weapons that Roan and Lassie had worn before, Wanda's eyelids twitched. He didn't understand how Roan could lie with his eyes open. No wonder he could become the head of the special investigation team at such a young age. Thinking of this, Wanda's eyes flashed with regret. Roan was still a waste of his talent working in the FBI. He was obviously a good seedling for their CIA. After all, John had been captured before, and no one knew what he had said. The longer the time dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for the CIA. Wanda pondered for a few seconds and whispered, and some new weapons and equipment. Roan had no objection to the number and style of weapons and equipment mentioned by Wanda, but he had his own ideas about SUVs. 5 SUVs. Impossible. Wanda widened his eyes and refused sternly. Let's not talk about how much 5 SUVs will cost. There are only 4 people in your special investigation team now. Why do you need so many cars? Luo An raised his eyebrows and whispered, 1 for each of the 4 people, and the rest will be kept as spare cars. After all, our special investigation team often handles difficult and complicated cases, so it is normal to need spare cars. Looking at Luo An with a righteous face, Wanda felt a little pain in his teeth. He was silent for a few seconds and whispered, 2, 4, 3, deal. Seeing Luo An agreed so quickly, Wanda's face twitched. Just as he was about to speak, Luo An continued to whisper, by the way, you just said that you support my promotion to team leader. After all, empty words are not enough. You should just write a simple report or explanation. Luo An didn't really want Wanda to help him become a regular, but if someone said that the special investigation team he led had too little contact with other federal law enforcement agencies, he would throw what Wanda wrote in front of those people. Look, CIA certification. The law enforcement agencies that have cooperated with a special investigation team led by him, Luo An, all said it was good. After listening to Luo An's words, Wanda was silent for a few seconds, sighed silently, and nodded in agreement. His previous judgment was wrong. Roan was not a good candidate to join the CIA. On the contrary, as long as Roan was thrown into the CIA, he could start working immediately. After finishing the matter with Wanda, John Rodriguez was escorted away. Roan had a brief chat with the smiling team leader Pot and Burn, and finally turned to Mona and Lassie in the office area. The special investigation team now has 2 SUVs, plus the 3 SUVs we just got. Each of them will have 1 in the future, and there will be 1 left. Roan briefly calculated his gains in his mind, then walked to the 2 women with a smile and asked, what discovery did you just mention? It is related to the clues that Lassie found before. Mona was a little puzzled as to why Roan was so happy, but she didn't ask in detail. She pointed to the information in the computer and said, Lassie found out from the Federal Customs and Border Protection that Fahad and others entered the Federation a year ago. Helping them enter the Federation was an underground gang called Kilio in Southern California whose main business is smuggling and illegal immigration. Pause. I have a question. Roan put his hands in a T-shape and looked at Lassie in confusion. How did the Federal Customs and Border Protection know and confirm that it was the Kilio gang that assisted Fahad and others in entering the Federation? Chapter 357 Evidence, the real mastermind. Lassie's expression was a little weird when answering the question raised by Luo An. The reason given by Customs and Border Protection is that they have an undercover agent in the Kilio gang, and the news was confirmed by the undercover agent. If the undercover agents were used in this way, they would have been killed long ago. Luo An was speechless. What's the real reason? The real reason is most likely that the Curio gang has always been in contact with the Customs and Border Protection. Lassie did not answer. Michelle next to her raised her hand and explained calmly, I have seen these things at the FBI inspection department. Because there are too many people sneaking into the Federation every year, the Customs and Border Protection has no way of determining who are ordinary people and who are terrorists. For the sake of federal security, some people in the Customs and Border Protection will cooperate with certain gangs on the border. The gangs tell the people who sneak into the Federation what their identities are. The Customs and Border Protection people catch the illegal immigrants, deport them or throw them into prison, while also reducing the targeting and investigation of these gangs. Then the Customs and Border Protection gets the credit. If the illegal immigrants want to enter the Federation again, the gangs can make another profit, right? Luo An was speechless. He could only say that it is worthy of being a capitalist country, where everything is about money. This kind of kill two birds with one stone operation is really reasonable within the Federation. Waving his hands, Roan put the matter behind him. Let's talk about the clues you found. Okay. Mona continued to talk to the computer. After Fahad and his group entered the Federation, there was no trace for a long time. But so many people could not leave no trace at all, so I carefully checked the place where the Customs and Border Protection said Fahad and his group entered the Federation. In a small town 10 miles away from there, I found the driving records of 2 tour company buses. The records showed that one of the buses was filled with Fahad's group, and the information about their identities in the travel company showed that they were company employees. Well done. Roan clapped his hands and smiled, and Michelle next to him continued, I checked this travel company, and the internal FBI information showed that this travel company is just a small company under the Muller Group in California. This Muller Group is very interesting recently. As soon as Michelle finished speaking, Lassie handed a piece of news to Roan and said with a smile, the founder of the Muller Group Sr. Muller passed away 9 months ago. In his will, he divided all his property among his immediate family members in proportion and stipulated that only his immediate family members were eligible to receive everything from him. But within these 6 months Sr. Muller's 2 sons and their family members died one after another, and now all his immediate family members have passed away. The only one left is Jasenia, 37 years old, who is not a direct relative of Sr. Muller, but his last wife before his death. Wow, what a cruel woman. Luo An was shocked when he saw the woman in the news. Although according to other FBI investigations, the death of Sr. Muller's immediate family members had no direct connection with her. She was the biggest beneficiary at the moment, and it was hard not to suspect her. Carefully checking the content in the news, Luo An continued to ask, what is the connection between this incident and our case? 2 very big connections. Mona tapped quickly on the keyboard with her 10 fingers, and a tree diagram soon appeared on the computer screen. She pointed to the old Muller at the top of the tree diagram and said, old Muller had 2 sons in his life. The eldest son had a son and a daughter, and the second son only had a wife but no children. But in fact, the second son loved to have fun when he was young. He made a lot of jokes and got many young girls pregnant. These girls basically took a large sum of money and, under the surveillance of the Muller family, aborted the second son's children, except for a girl named Elder Brown, who disappeared. Luo An narrowed his eyes. I remember Belva's full name, Belva Brown. Yes, Belva is the daughter of Elder Brown. Mona put the ID photos of the 2 women together and took out the photo of old Muller's second son. So, Belva is actually the illegitimate daughter of the second son. Belva is dead, but Kara, the child she gave birth to with her eggs and uterus, is the only 4th generation direct relative of old Muller. She is also the only person currently qualified to inherit everything from him according to the provisions of old Muller's will. After listening to Mona's narration, Roan threw the newspaper in his hand aside and asked, are Jasenia and Fahad related? Jasenia is not, but her uncle is. Michelle handed a folder to Roan and said, Jasenia's uncle used to be a political family of a party in Belize and had a close relationship with Fahad's father. Jasenia and Fahad are less than 10 years apart in age, so there is a chance that they knew each other. After Michelle finished speaking, Lassie poured 2 cups of coffee and handed them to Mona and Michelle, then looked at Roan and concluded, Yesenia has successfully taken the position of old Mueller's last wife through years of management. Maybe old Mueller's death is also related to her. The rich had prenuptial agreements before they died, and Yesenia would not get much money if old Mueller died. But as long as all of old Mueller's direct relatives disappeared, then with his last wife, and so many years of operation, Yesenia would have too many possibilities. It happened that Fahad's father died, and he only had revenge in his mind. Yesenia could use this as a bargaining chip to get him to kill. Now it seems that, as long as Kara, the 4th generation direct relative of old Mueller, is killed, Yesenia's plan to take over the Magpie's Nest will be completely successful. This is also the reason why Fahad is not worried about going to jail, because as the person who did it, Yesenia will definitely send someone to rescue him. Otherwise Fahad will tell this matter, and Yesenia's plan will fail completely. After listening to Lassie's summary combined with the evidence they have at hand, Mona and Michelle nodded repeatedly, and their faces were very solemn. As women, they admit that Yesenia's heart is much more cruel than Fizz, and her methods are also fierce enough. Looking at the information compiled by Mona, Michelle and Lassie, Luo An pondered for a long time, shook his head slowly and said, there is also a possibility that Yesenia will not kill Kara at present, but will temporarily control Kara for a period of time. It is far more in line with Yesenia's interests to move Kara, a 6-year-old child, out to stabilize the internal affairs of the Mueller group, and inherit everything of the old Mueller, and then slowly digest the wealth of Kara afterwards, which is far more in line with Yesenia's interests than killing Kara directly now. Because as the direct relatives of the old Mueller lined up to die, as if they were cursed, the stock price and economic situation of the Mueller group have begun to have problems. Yesenia wants to inherit the building, not the ruins. Lassie and Michelle pondered for a few seconds and nodded. Luo An's analysis does make sense, but Mona spread her hands. So, what should we do next? With the financial resources that Yesenia now has, she has a way to say that Kara was rescued from the robbers with money. It's very simple. Luo An pondered for a while, and suddenly laughed. Do you remember why our special investigation team was established? It's time to cooperate with other federal law enforcement agencies. X3. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 358 Luo An sets a trap, confrontation at the shareholders meeting. Special Investigation Team, Office Area. Roan did not explain in detail to the puzzled looks of Mona, Lassie and Michelle, but took out his mobile phone and left the office area to start making calls. Wanda? Yes, it's me, Roan Greenwood. I have something good to tell you. I'm not lying to you. How could I lie to someone? It's really good news. Captain Elmer? Hello, I'm Roan Greenwood. I have a case here. I think you may be interested. Seeing Roan standing next to the coffee machine and making a phone call with a warm smile on his face, Michelle still tilted her head in confusion. Lassie patted Michelle's arm and whispered, did you see the expression on Roan's face? Be careful of this expression. It means Roan is going to set a trap for others again. Michelle was a little surprised to hear this. Mona was speechless, and when Lassie was about to continue talking, Roan finished the call, turned around and said with a smile, Lassie, Michelle, there are some things you need to do tomorrow. What is it? Roan did not answer immediately, but the smile on his face became more sunny. The 28th hour of Kara's disappearance. Pleasanton, located in the heart of the federal state of California, is about 100 miles south of San Francisco, and is a very convenient transportation hub between northern and southern California. The Mueller Group is located in this city. At 9:30 in the morning, the group's internal shareholders meeting was held, and a group of middle-aged white men in suits and leather shoes took their seats. At the head of the meeting room, there was a middle-aged white woman wearing a women's suit, with long red hair and a relatively gentle face. Yesenia, why are you holding another shareholder meeting? As soon as everyone sat down, an elderly white man sitting on the left side of the long table asked with a cold face, "The internal situation of the Mueller Group is very bad now. You are holding a meeting. Is there any financial problem in which branch again?" The elderly white man did not mention the Mueller family. Compared with the so-called feelings, they care more about the interests in their hands. If it weren't for Yesenia's coercion, inducement, division and coaxing of the shareholders in the room, making it impossible for them to unite together, the elderly white man would have gathered everyone to overthrow Yesenia. There is only one topic for the shareholders meeting today, and that is the issue of the shares of the Mueller family. In response to the cold eyes of the old white man, Yesenia smiled slightly and explained, "Everyone knows that our Mueller family has encountered unexpected events in recent months, which has prevented the Mueller family shares from being smoothly inherited. This has caused a lot of trouble for the Mueller Group." Yesenia narrated these things without blushing or panting, as if everything had nothing to do with her. She pretended not to see the shareholders with different expressions on both sides of the conference table, and then said, "But fortunately, after my unremitting efforts, I successfully found the fourth generation member of the Mueller family, the only person who meets the provisions of the old Mueller's will and can inherit everything from him." As Yesenia's voice fell, the buzzing of shareholders in the conference room suddenly sounded. Some people doubted the authenticity of the identity of the heir she mentioned, and some people quickly guessed Yesenia's true purpose. Without waiting for the shareholders to express doubts or other opinions, Yesenia clapped her hands with a smile, and the voice fell, and the door of the conference room not far away was opened from the outside. Everyone turned their eyes to the door of the conference room, wanting to see what the fourth generation heir mentioned by Yesenia looked like. Then they saw a group of guys in suits walking in. Behind them was a bewildered woman, holding a little girl in her arms, who was afraid to speak. "Good morning, Miss Yesenia." At the front of the group of people in suits was Lassie, who had short hair and a heroic face, and behind her stood Michelle. Pulling out the FBI's golden badge to show her identity, Lassie said expressionlessly, "According to our investigation, Kara was kidnapped and disappeared 28 hours ago. I would like to ask, why is she here with you now?" Looking at the female subordinate holding Kara, who had prepared a surprise for all shareholders in advance, Jessica took a deep breath, her expression unchanged. She was well prepared and explained calmly, "I also know about Kara's kidnapping. For Kara's life safety, I worked hard to find the robbers who kidnapped her, negotiated with the kidnappers, and exchanged Kara for $5 million US. If the people don't report it, the officials won't investigate it." The fact that Jessica was willing to pay for the exchange of people herself definitely did not violate any federal law. The only problem is that Jessica didn't notify Kara's parents immediately. But Jessica can completely throw the pot to her subordinates, saying that their subordinates delayed their work, and it had nothing to do with her. So Lassie didn't say much. After listening to Yesenia's reasons, she stepped back and gave up her position, and then a middle-aged white man with an unremarkable appearance came out. "Hello, I'm Elmer, the senior investigation team leader of ICI, Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. We have some things that need your cooperation, Ms. Yesenia." Chapter 193. The other law enforcement department that Luo An chose to cooperate with was the EYES, and it was the Criminal Investigation Division of the EYES. The reason is that on the one hand, Luo An and Elmer had met before and had contact, and on the other hand, the Mueller Group is a large company and enterprise, and the work of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service is to investigate these people. On weekdays, when the Mueller Group was stable, it would be difficult for the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service to investigate them. But now that the old Mueller has died, the Mueller family is in a mess, and the Mueller Group is also in chaos. This time is just right for the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service to investigate. The Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service does not care about the specific cause of the case. They only care about whether the big company has evaded taxes. But how could a large enterprise like the Mueller Group not reasonably manipulate taxes? Upon hearing Elmer's identity, all the shareholders present changed their expressions and turned their eyes to Yesenia. Yesenia's face also darkened. She simply glanced at the shareholders around the conference table quickly thinking about who was the mastermind behind the scenes, and quickly stood up and walked towards Elmer, saying seriously, "I will ask my lawyer, financial advisor and the company's financial director to cooperate with your investigation, but I still have a shareholders meeting to finish, so." Jasenia's plan is to first confirm Kara's identity and then confirm her identity as Kara's guardian so that she can still control the Miller Group. But before Jasenia finished her words, a woman who had been lowering her head suddenly came out from behind Michelle, stared at Jasenia fiercely, and said coldly, "Jasenia, I'm Kara's mother, Madeline Allen, and I accuse you of abusing Kara. I demand a private negotiation with you." Madeline Allen's sudden appearance scared Jasenia, but with Madeline's loud noise and Elmer and Lass's eager eyes, today's shareholders meeting would definitely not be held. Jasenia had to announce the suspension of the shareholders meeting and turned around and left the meeting room with Elmer and others. In the meeting room, all the shareholders looked at each other and looked at others with puzzled eyes, wondering who was responsible for this series of operations. The shareholders who had ulterior motives briefly discussed for a moment and were about to leave when the door of the conference room was suddenly pushed open and a man with bruises on his face walked in with a smile. "Don't leave, everyone. Let me introduce myself. I'm Kara's father, John Rodriguez." At the same time, in the interrogation room of the Special Investigation Team, Luo An handed the video surveillance to the man in front of him and said with a smile, "See, I didn't lie to you." Chapter 359, The Identity of the Kidnapper, Luo An's Serial Plot. The man sitting opposite Ron in the interrogation room was the man with the black mask in the previous gunfight in the industrial park, Maxwell, a subordinate indeed of Fahad's father. The surveillance footage Ron showed him was the footage of Jasenia being taken away by Lassie and the Criminal Investigation Division of the Eyes. Do you know what the Criminal Investigation Division of the Eyes does? Looking at Maxwell, whose expression remained unchanged, but whose eye movement frequency had obviously increased a lot, Ron poured him a cup of coffee and explained softly, "The main work of this department is to collect taxes on all sources of income of federal citizens. This all sources may include smuggling, money laundering, robbery, drug trafficking." Okay, I know what the Criminal Investigation Division of the Eyes does. When Maxwell heard Ron say that Jessica had a lot of problems with her financial situation and was now being targeted by the Criminal Investigation Division of the Eyes and was already overwhelmed and had no time to save them, he couldn't hold her anymore and looked up at Ron. "What do you want to do?" "I don't want to do anything. I just feel it's not worth it for you. How much have you done for Jessica? How much money have you helped her make? And what's the result? What did Jessica give you?" Ron chuckled, took back the surveillance in front of Maxwell, and handed it back to Mona, and said with a smile, "Without Jessica's help, you and Fahad would definitely live in a federal prison forever for the rest of your lives. As far as I know, Fahad doesn't seem to have any children yet. His family ends with him. Besides, he is less than 30 years old this year and looks good. He is a group of shrewd guys in the federal prison." Luo An's interrogation method is very simple. Fahad only has revenge in his mind. Threatening him with Jessica is probably useless and will arouse his resistance. And since Maxwell is a diehard fan of the Fahad family, he would never ignore the safety of Fahad's lower body the rest of his life. As expected, after listening to Ron's detailed description of the local conditions and customs in the federal prison, Maxwell's face completely darkened. "Enough. What do you want?" Seeing Maxwell's face, Ron stopped talking nonsense and said directly, "Tell me who those people who kidnapped Kara are, and where they are. In return, when the court opens, I will ask the judge to fight for a slightly better prison for you." Hearing Ron's words, Maxwell sneered, "Just help us fight for a change of prison? I ask you to help us apply to the judge for the maximum reduction of sentence. You know this is impossible, Maxwell." Ron spread his hands and smiled. "How many people did you bring into the federal government this time? How many weapons and equipment did you take? And how many people did the SWAT team dispatch? It's not an exaggeration to say that you are a terrorist attack this time. I said I helped you fight for a change of prison, which proves that I didn't lie to you. If I said I could successfully help you reduce your sentence and parole, would you believe it?" Hearing Ron's words, Maxwell fell silent. Although he wanted to curse, he had to admit that what Roan said was really right. The air in the interrogation room was quiet for a long time. After a long while, Maxwell sighed and said in a deep voice, "In addition to a more comfortable prison, I have another request. That is, you must lock me, Fahad, and the rest of us in the same prison." In addition to Fahad and Maxwell, there were 3 other lucky guys in the group of shirt-covered guys who survived. If they could be locked up in the same prison, Maxwell would have a certain degree of confidence in protecting Fahad's lower body and the rest of his life. Luo An thought for a moment, then nodded. "Okay, I will explain this to the judge." Seeing Luo An nod in agreement, Maxwell breathed a sigh of relief, picked up the coffee on the table and drank it, and whispered, "The guy who kidnapped the little guy's not one of ours, but an extra guy that Jessica found. I don't know his name, I only know that he is a white man with no hair and no eyebrows. In addition, before the specific action, one of my men saw the car he was driving and told me the license plate number of that car." "Good." Luo An nodded with satisfaction. After asking for the license plate number, he immediately asked Mona to start investigating. At the same time, he called the portrait artist to hurry to the interrogation room to make a simulated portrait of the guy without eyebrows mentioned by Maxwell. With the exact license plate number, Mona quickly found the car before the simulated portrait artist finished drawing the portrait. The other party used a fake license plate, but it is indeed a black Buick sedan. In addition, the driving trajectory shows that the car drove straight to a small town in the south of Pleasanton on the night Kara disappeared. "Very good." Roan bent down and carefully checked the computer interface and asked, "Did you find out who was driving the car?" "Of course. In a parking lot in northern Los Angeles, he was photographed getting out of the car to buy food." Mona's 10 fingers tapped quickly on the grinding plate mountain, and the ID photo of a guy without hair and eyebrows appeared on the computer screen. "Kendrick, 37 years old, has multiple charges and is unemployed. However, the FBI database shows that this guy is suspected to be a killer. It seems that the killer business is really a blue ocean industry in the Federation." Roan smiled and patted Mona on the shoulder, then took out his mobile phone and called the team leader Pot and Burn. "Sir, we have found the guy who kidnapped Kara and killed the nanny. He is in a small town south of Pleasanton. After all, Kendrick's location is a bit far from Los Angeles. Instead of driving a long way to catch him, it is better to ask the team leader for help and ask him to coordinate with local law enforcement agencies to catch him." After Potent Burn nodded and agreed, saying that he would solve the matter, Roan hung up the phone with a smile. Seeing this, Mona looked up and asked in confusion, "Why did you ask Lassie and Michelle to go to Pleasanton?" "To delay time." Roan sat next to Mona, stretched his waist, and explained with a smile, "The main purpose of doing this is to make Jasenia too busy to handle everything." Roan's plan was simple. He wanted Lassie, Michelle, Elmer and Kara's mother Madeline Allen to interrupt Jasenia's plan to establish Kara as the heir and herself as Kara's guardian at the shareholders meeting. Then let Kara's father John Rodriguez replace Jasenia at the shareholders meeting to do this. Establish Kara as the heir and establish himself as Kara's legal guardian. As for whether the group of shareholders will refuse, each shareholder has his own ulterior motives, and there are many who are dissatisfied with Jasenia. As long as the interests are sufficiently divided and won over, John, an experienced CIA and a partner of a chemical company, will not fail. At the same time, Roan interrogated Maxwell himself, got the information of the kidnapper, arrested him, and then tried to get the kidnapper to identify Jasenia. Then Jasenia, as the mastermind behind the scenes, had the joint identification of Maxwell and the kidnapper, and was unable to do anything else, so she naturally failed completely, and came to an end. Papa. After listening to Roan's explanation, Mona applauded repeatedly with admiration on her face. "It's amazing. And Lassie was right. Once you smile so beautifully, you are planning to cheat people, Roan." 2 hours later, Roan was waiting for the action news from the town. At this time, his mobile phone suddenly rang. He picked it up and found that it was Lassie who called him. Luo An frowned slightly. Could something have gone wrong in Pleasanton? Chapter 360. The case ends. Luo An wins N in one fell swoop. Special investigation team in the team leader's office. "This is Roan. After answering the call on his phone, Roan asked, "How was it, Lassie? Did the operation go smoothly?" Of course it went very smoothly. In a corridor inside the Mueller Group in Pleasanton, Lassie saw through the glass that Yesenia had a dark expression when facing the ICE Criminal Investigation Division in the room. She smiled and said, as expected, Yesenia's personal financial situation and the financial management of the Mueller Group have problems. The ICE Criminal Investigation Division has already begun to prepare to take action. Thinking of this, Lassie felt very respectful of Roan. She knew that Roan knew Chief Elmer of the ICE Criminal Investigation Division, but she never thought that Roan could actually call him to help. Good. Hearing that the plan went smoothly, Roan breathed a sigh of relief, took the teacup handed to him by Mona, and then asked, "How is John doing? I called you to talk about him." Speaking of John Rodriguez, Lassie glanced at Michelle next to her and whispered, "He just successfully established Kara as the 4th generation legal heir of the Mueller family. Before Kara comes of age, he will temporarily take charge of the Mueller family shares on Kara's behalf." Not only that, John also successfully persuaded more than half of the shareholders to serve as the president of the Mueller Group for the next year. Thinking of John Rodriguez's coercion, inducement, division and winning over, and soft and hard tactics at the shareholders meeting, Lassie's expression was very strange. "Roan, John is indeed an experienced CIA. His methods are flexible and powerful enough. But wasn't John taken away by Wanda from the CIA before? How did you convince him to let him go?" "I didn't ask Wanda to let him go. I simply provided him with a plan." Hearing John's performance at the shareholders meeting, Roan smiled calmly. He had expected this situation a long time ago. Handing Mona a chair and asking her to use the computer to keep an eye on the situation in the town, Roan briefly answered Lassie's question. The reason why Wanda was in a hurry to take John away was because he was worried that John had said something he shouldn't have said during his captivity, which would cause damage to the CIA's arrangements. Roan then briefly described Kara's identity, the situation of the Mueller Group, and the role John could play in this matter. The Mueller Group is a large group with companies and factories inside and outside the Federation. If John controls this group, the CIA will have more options when doing things overseas. As an old CIA, Wanda only has the size of the interests in his mind. Knowing that John's control of the Mueller Group would bring greater benefits to the CIA, Wanda immediately agreed to Roan's request. Not only that, when Roan heard Lassie say that John knew the temperament and background of each shareholder at the shareholders meeting, he grinned. He didn't give John the information about these people, so the information could only be given by the CIA. As the actual operator of the matter, John naturally would not refuse Roan and Wanda's request. On the one hand, Kara is his biological daughter, and it is a great thing for Kara to inherit the legacy of the old Mueller family. On the other hand, John has no choice now. The internal audit and investigation of the CIA is not a simple and interesting thing. The only problem is that as John's control over the Mueller Group becomes deeper and deeper, he will naturally have conflicts with the CIA in the future. If he is dissatisfied with the control of the CIA, he may cause trouble. But what does that have to do with Roan? He did not force John to do something he didn't want to do. Roan used the interests of money to promote the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. He persuaded the CIA with the multiple choices of interests when doing things abroad in the future, and he moved John with his daughter and freedom. The special investigation team caught the mastermind behind the case, found the killer who carried out the specific action, and got several new cars and new equipment. In the whole incident, except for the mastermind behind the case, Yesenia, and those who worked for her, everyone else was very happy. Using visible interests to drive others, those people will not only not blame Roan, but will thank him instead. Luo An deepened his relationship with these people, and left a good impression. It was a simple operation, but it was very effective. He achieved many goals in one stroke. X3 After listening to Luo An's analysis, Lassie stood in the corridor, dumbfounded, and took a breath. Mona, who was beside Luo An, was stunned at first, then a little shocked, and then her face gradually turned red. She looked at Luo An's profile and her breathing became slightly faster. She liked the way Luo An was strategizing. Michelle's eyes widened. She found that she still underestimated Luo An's wisdom and means. Moreover, Michelle also found some things that Luo An didn't say, and Lassie and Mona didn't find. This time, the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service gained a lot from Jessica and the Mueller Group. When Luo An went to the Washington headquarters, he would definitely receive recognition and support from the eyes, and Luo An's chance of becoming a regular employee would be higher. Also because of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service, turmoil within the Mueller Group was inevitable. But the culprit who caused the ICE's Criminal Investigation Division to appear was Jessica. John could take this opportunity to eliminate dissidents and control the Mueller Group faster, which would make the CIA more satisfied. So as long as Luo An asked, the CIA would definitely not be stingy in supporting Luo An's promotion. Luo An was very smart, agile, and knew how to use office politics. He also had a backer and a big supporter behind him. The only two obstacles that prevented him from becoming the head of the Special Investigation Team were his age and qualifications. After all, Luo An's promotion speed was too fast. The other 9 heads of the Special Investigation Team were all under 30 years old. But now he had Vereen's and Clement, the two big supporters, the CIA's affirmation, and the ICE's recommendation. Michelle swallowed her saliva. If Luo An could not become the head of the Special Investigation Team when he went to Washington this time, she would never read books in her life. Michelle silently made up her mind that she would stay in this Special Investigation Team from now on. Unless Luo An drove her away, no one could pull her away. Gently pinching Mona's face and ignoring her shining eyes, Roan smiled and briefly explained a few words to Lassie before hanging up the phone. Then he received a call from the captain of the SWAT team in the small town south of Pleasanton, who was trying to capture the killer Kendrick. The mission was a complete success. No one from the SWAT team was injured. The target was shot in the leg and abdomen and has been sent to the hospital for treatment. Thank you for your hard work. Roan smiled slightly, asked about the process and details of the operation, and then agreed with the captain of the SWAT team to have a drink together later, and hung up the phone again. Throwing the phone aside, Roan stretched hard and exclaimed loudly, "This case is finally solved." Snap. The next second, before Roan could retract his arms, Mona suddenly sat on his thighs, and at the same time, took out a tie and lightly tied Roan's two wrists. Feeling his hands being controlled, and looking at Mona's pretty face, so close to him, Luo An raised the corner of his mouth. "Hey, this is an office. You said before that an office can only be an office space. This is your team leader's office, not our office area. And as long as you don't take the last step, it will be fine." Mona bit her red lips and smiled slightly, then grabbed Luo An's head and kissed him. Chapter 361, The Consequences of Arson. Heading to Washington headquarters. That afternoon, the killer Kendrick was sent to the Special Investigation Team and quickly confessed the whole story. Jessica was also temporarily taken away by the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service because of tax issues. Her personal secretary and private lawyer were also taken away with her. These two people knew the most. Given the social habit of the federal government that individuals are given priority, Jessica's fate can be imagined. Federal prison is her destination. Elmer, the chief of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service, ICI, also called Roan in the afternoon. While briefly explaining the situation, he did not mean to blame anyone, and smiled and said to Roan, "If there are such cases in the future, please call me." The Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service is not afraid of tiredness or trouble, but is afraid of not getting money. Roan was speechless when he hung up the phone, and at the same time, he had a new understanding of the style and power of the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. In the evening, before leaving get off work, Lassie and Michelle returned to Los Angeles. Because they had been dealing with this kidnapping case for 3 consecutive days, Luo An simply took a half day off, and the 4 of them came to work at noon on Thursday. "I hate this kind of half-day holiday." On the chair in the office area, Lassie yawned and took a big bite of Mexican chicken roll, looking very decadent. "I can't sleep in completely, and I can't play to my heart's content." On the chair next to her, Mona took a sip of coffee and smiled. "Very good. Then I will tell Luo An later that Lassie will not have to take this kind of half-day holiday in the future." Hearing this, Lassie's eyes widened immediately, opened her arms, and rushed towards Mona. Wow, you are such a bad woman. Wait a minute. Just when Lassie was about to pounce on Mona, Mona hurriedly picked up a hamburger from her desk and blocked Lassie's mouth. I had a stomachache yesterday, and I'm not feeling well now. Sorry. Hearing Mona's words, Lassie immediately stopped and sat back in her chair. Mona breathed a sigh of relief, then glanced at the team leader's office without making a sound. Yesterday in the team leader's office, she only lit the fire, but did not put it out, and she was very happy to see Luo An's anxious look. Then last night Mona knew the consequences of arson, and she has not recovered completely until now, and her legs are still a little weak. This made Mona suspect that this so-called half-day holiday was Luo An's revenge. I have some medicine for my stomach here. Michelle heard Mona say that she was not feeling well, and immediately took out a bottle of medicine from her desk and handed it to her. Mona's eyes flashed with embarrassment, but she still said thank you. Michelle smiled and nodded, moved the chair back to her desk, and asked in confusion, Lassie, why are you so sleepy? During this half-day holiday, Michelle had a good sleep after reading a book, and now she is very energetic. Without answering Michelle's question, Lassie fell asleep on the table before she finished chewing the hamburger in her mouth. Michelle didn't know what to say when she saw this. Mona patted her shoulder and told her not to worry. You don't know about Lassie's situation yet. She must have gone out with some girl last night. That should be the case. Michelle nodded helplessly. She found that there were no normal people in this special investigation team in the popular sense. Michelle herself likes reading very much and can give up other desires for reading. Lassie likes beautiful girls very much. She feels uncomfortable if she can't see a beautiful girl for a day. Mona likes to use computers to hack into various programs very much. If she wasn't wearing an FBI uniform, she would have been put in jail long ago. As for the deputy team leader Luo An, Michelle scratched her head. On the surface, Luo An seemed normal in all aspects, but in fact, Luo An was probably the most abnormal one. She just didn't find out what was abnormal about Luo An. Thinking of this, Michelle asked, Mona, where is deputy team leader Luo An? I haven't seen him today. He went to the office of the team leader. Mona answered casually, it should be something about the Washington headquarters. Michelle nodded and stopped asking. There was still a lot of work to be done in the follow-up of Kara's case, and there were a lot of documents on the desks of the three of them. Seeing that Lassie was sleeping soundly, Michelle simply covered her with a piece of clothing, then took a few documents from Lassie's desk and put them on the folder on her desk and began to deal with them with her head down. On the other side, in the office of the team leader Potent Burn handed a notice to Roan, leaned back, and looked at Roan with admiration. As the team leader, Potent Burn naturally knew what Roan did in the second half of this case. With his experience, he quickly discovered Roan's method of gaining multiple benefits in one fell swoop. After briefly analyzing the benefits and interests that Roan had gained from doing this, Potent Burn sighed repeatedly. It was a pity that such an excellent talent was not his. Roan didn't know what Potent Burn was thinking. He took the folder handed over by the other party and found that it contained the exact notice that had just been issued by the Washington headquarters, ordering him to go to Washington next Monday. The notice also briefly introduced the content of the assessment of the heads of the special investigation teams. In addition to the review and assessment of the cases handled by the special investigation teams in the past, there is also a psychological assessment and an interview review. Luo An could understand the psychological assessment and didn't care much about it, but the notice did not specify the specific content of the interview assessment and what specific aspects would be reviewed. So Luo An looked up and asked with a smile, Sir, what exactly is this interview review? It's just a very simple interview question. Potent Burn laughed. According to the FBI's regulations, if you want to be officially promoted to a team manager within the FBI, you must have sufficient professional means such as organizational coordination and flexibility, and these are what the interview will assess. Generally, there are 7 interview examiners, 1 main and 6 deputy, and the questions asked are the most likely situations to be encountered when handling a case. Potent Burn simply described to Luo An the questions that might be encountered during the interview. They were not too difficult and were not a problem for Luo An. After listening to Potent Burn's description, Roan breathed a sigh of relief and smiled. "I understand. Thank you, sir." "Yeah." The two chatted briefly for a while, and Potent Burn asked Roan to hurry up and handle the follow-up of this kidnapping case, and warned Roan not to forget to bring all the files of all the cases he had handled in the past when he went to the Washington headquarters, because the examiner might ask targeted questions about the details of those cases. "Okay, thank you, sir," Roan suddenly realized, and left the team leader's office a few minutes later. In the next 2 days, Roan and the special investigation team have been dealing with the follow-up of the kidnapping case, but this case involves many people after all, and it was not completely handled until Roan and Mona went to Washington together. On Sunday, Roan and Mona flew to the FBI Washington headquarters. At the same time, when Lassie and Michelle were working overtime in the office area to handle the follow-up of the case, the door of the special investigation team was suddenly knocked. The two turned around at the same time, and a familiar man appeared in front of them. Chapter 362 arrived in Washington and learned new information from the investigation team. Federal Political Center, Washington, Sunday. Before going here, Luo An called Verines and exchanged feelings with her. He also asked her indirectly about the evaluation criteria for this time. Verines did not elaborate, but she said that she happened to leave New York on Monday and went to Washington to report on her work. They would meet and talk then. "So, Verines asked to meet you?" After getting off the plane, Roan and the other walked out of Washington Dulles International Airport and hailed a taxi to go to the hotel they had booked in advance. After listening to Roan's narration, Mona asked with some concern, "Will there be any problems?" "It's just an interview assessment. What problems can there be?" Roan put his arm around Mona's slender waist and smiled, pointed to the scenery outside the car window, and said calmly, "Don't think about those things. You should think about where we will go shopping and eating after we finish packing in the hotel." "You're right." Seeing that Roan, the person involved, was not panicked at all, Mona also put down her hanging heart and began to carefully calculate the famous landmarks in Washington, D.C. Monuments, national malls, museums, national theaters, convention centers, national portrait galleries and other cultural venues are all places where tourists who come to Washington like to check in and visit. The taxi arrived at the hotel, paid and got off. Roan and Mona didn't take any luggage. The hotel waiter came over to take a look and then quietly retreated. Mona was about to walk into the wine shop with her bag on her back, but she found Luo An standing there without moving, still watching the taxi slowly leaving. "What's wrong?" Seeing this, Mona hurried to Luo An's side and carefully recalled the driver in the taxi just now. She had not paid much attention to him just now. "It's okay, I'm just a little surprised that we are so lucky to meet a taciturn taxi driver. In the Federation, there are not many taciturn taxi drivers, let alone taxi drivers in the area near the scenic spot." Luo An smiled and shook his head, turned around and hugged Mona, and walked into the hotel. From the calluses on the hands and body movements of the taxi driver, Luo An could see that the other party was not an ordinary person. At first, he thought that the other party was coming for him and Mona, but the emotional perception in his mind found that the driver had no abnormal emotions towards him, and there was no abnormal movement along the way. He sent them to the designated location and left directly. There are many retired soldiers in the Federation in recent years. There is really no way. It is also a good choice to run a taxi to make money. Maybe this driver is in this situation since the other party is not coming for him. Luo An, who is too lazy to meddle in other people's business, will naturally not target the other party. After borrowing a phone in the hotel lobby to contact Washington's law enforcement department and briefly explaining the situation to the taxi driver, Roan and Mona chatted and walked towards the hotel elevator. The taxi driver in the distance. Roan and Mona's room is on the 11th floor of the hotel. The two are now colleagues on the surface. In order to prevent someone from making trouble for this, they still need to do surface work, so this room is a suite. The suite price is a bit expensive, but it's only 2 days, and for Roan, who has a little wealth, it doesn't make him feel bad. After entering the room to rest for a while, Roan and Mona simply packed up their belongings and left the hotel to visit various attractions in Washington. Roan himself has almost no artistic germs, and the history of the Federation is too short for him to have a deep understanding. Mona is similar to him. Various cultural landscapes are far less interesting to her than mechanical electronic networks. So the two simply visited a few attractions and went to a famous restaurant in Washington to enjoy delicious food together. In the evening, the two returned to the hotel suite and rested for a while before it was late at night. When Mona fell asleep, Roan felt a little hungry, so he went to the hotel's 24-hour buffet restaurant to have a midnight snack. Deputy Team Leader Greenwood. Just as Roan sat on a chair in the restaurant with a knife and fork, struggling with the large steak on the plate, a strange man's voice came from behind. Stopping what he was doing and turning around, Roan found that the person who came was a middle-aged white man with short brown hair, wearing glasses, more than 1.9 meters tall, but not much muscle, and looked like a scholar. Roan had asked Verinus for other special investigation teams before, so he quickly recognized the identity of the person who came. Ethan Patel, the head of the special investigation team of the FBI Chicago branch, 36 years old this year. Chicago's customs and people are very famous throughout the Federation. As the head of the special investigation team in this city, Ethan Patel looks like a scholar, but he has handled many cases and dealt with many ruthless people. Hello, Team Leader Patel. Seeing the other party extending his hand to him with a smile, Roan naturally extended his hand and shook hands with the other party, saying with a smile, "I didn't expect such a coincidence that we actually stayed in the same hotel. Not only us, but also others." After shaking hands, Ethan Patel took a glass of wine and sat opposite Roan, saying with a smile, "In addition to me, Team Leader Philip from Houston and Team Leader Wilson from Philadelphia also live here. We chatted together this afternoon. Wow, it seems that I missed a good party. What a pity." Roan quickly finished the steak on the table, picked up the wine glass, and clinked it with the other party, and started chatting with a smile. Ethan Patel spoke at a steady pace, and in a very kind tone, indeed more like a scholar. Roan was not sure what the other party's purpose was now, and it was not appropriate to leave directly, so he started to talk to the other party randomly. Seeing that Roan was talking about something further and further, from the steak on the table to the annual forest fires of the federal neighbors, Ethan Patel glanced at his watch and found that it was already early morning. The corner of his mouth twitched. He raised his glass and clinked it with Roan, and finally opened his mouth to lead the conversation to the main topic. Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, I wonder what you think of our 10 special investigation teams? Special investigation team. Hearing Ethan Patel's question, Roan's heart moved slightly, and he did not answer, but asked back, I wonder what Team Leader Patel thinks of the special investigation team. Ethan Patel smiled slightly and did not answer. Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, this is my question to you. So that's it. Roan patted his head in sudden realization and then replied with a smile, my opinion on the special investigation team is the same as your opinion on the special investigation team, Team Leader Patel. Hearing Roan's answer, Ethan Patel did not know whether to laugh or cry and thought to himself, it seems that the information I found is correct. Roan Greenwood is indeed a cautious and cunning little fox. No wonder he can control a special investigation team at such a young age. Roan still smiled at Ethan Patel's dissatisfaction. He had no idea what Ethan Patel was thinking or what he wanted to do. In this situation, he naturally couldn't reveal his own judgment. Who knows whether the other party's position will be an enemy or a friend after he said it. Seeing that Roan would continue to play dumb if he didn't come up with something, Ethan Patel stopped being a riddle man and whispered a message. Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, it is said that one of the reasons why the Washington headquarters summoned us this time is to see if our special investigation team is necessary. Roan raised his eyebrows when he heard this, and he finally understood what Ethan Patel meant. Chapter 363 Bargaining, Luo An's Counterattack. A hotel in Washington, D.C., a buffet restaurant. Looking at Ethan Patel in front of him, Roan took a sip of the wine glass, and his mind was turning rapidly. There are two main reasons for the establishment of the Special Investigation Team. First, the federal network world is developing rapidly, but the FBI's case handling methods are still somewhat old-fashioned. The newly established Special Investigation Team needs to innovate the FBI's traditional case handling methods and models, and is a pioneer. Second, the FBI often needs to cooperate with other federal law enforcement agencies during the case handling process, but if the other party does not cooperate, it will cause many problems. The Special Investigation Team needs to explore a new model of efficient cooperation with other law enforcement agencies. In the words of the other side of the ocean, these 10 Special Investigation Teams are the pilot projects created by the FBI Washington headquarters. Because this is a pilot project, the Washington headquarters has given these 10 Special Investigation Teams a lot of authority, making the power of the 10 Special Investigation Team controllers much greater than before. When he was working in the 5th Investigation Team, August was in charge of the management work. In addition, he had been in the leadership for too short a time and lacked experience. He was not particularly familiar with the twists and turns in the team, so Luo An did not have a particularly clear understanding of the excessive authority of the Special Investigation Team. But people like As and Patel were different. Before they became the Special Investigation Team, they were the leaders of the Frontline Investigation Team. After becoming the leaders of the Special Investigation Team, they immediately figured out how to reasonably use the power and authority given to them by the FBI Washington headquarters. Once the seeds of power are released, it will inevitably cause resistance if they want to take them back. This is what As and Patel and his people think, so the Special Investigation Team must not be abolished. If it really needs to be abolished, it cannot be done now, at least it should be cancelled after they are promoted. The reason you told me this is. Luo An's mind raced, thinking about why As and Patel told him this, but on the surface he showed a shocked expression, and suddenly put down the wine glass in his hand. Captain Patel, where did you hear this news? This is impossible. How long has our Special Investigation Team been established? No one can be sure about this kind of thing. As and Patel did not say where the news came from. As for Luo An's question about the short time the Special Investigation Team was established, he sneered. The group of people on Capitol Hill voted in favor in the morning and announced the decision to be invalid in the afternoon. Aren't there many? Luo An didn't know how to answer. As and Patel used the example of Congress, and he really couldn't refute it. There were too many things that changed their orders overnight, and it was just a basic operation for the members of parliament to jump back and forth. For example, in the matter of running for the chairman of the parliament, a member of parliament jumped between election and no election 3 times in half a day, leaving the voters speechless. Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, I've heard about your deeds in Los Angeles. They are very admirable and amazing. Seeing that Ron was silent, Ethan Patel picked up the bottle and poured wine into the glasses of the two people, saying, I believe you will be able to officially become the leader of the Special Investigation Team of the FBI Los Angeles branch this time. Thank you. Ron smiled, picked up the wine glass, and clinked it with the other party, and said with a smile, I don't know what Team Leader Patel means. If the Special Investigation Team is cancelled, you have worked hard for nothing during this period. Ethan Patel put down the wine glass, stared at Ron, and said in a deep voice, I have talked to Team Leader Phillip in Houston, Team Leader Wilson in Philadelphia and several other team leaders. The Special Investigation Team is of great significance to the FBI, and must not be cancelled casually. With your performance during this period, the Washington headquarters will definitely pay attention to your opinions. As long as you tell them the importance of the existence of the Special Investigation Team, plus our support, I believe that the Washington headquarters will definitely give up the idea of cancelling the Special Investigation Team this time. After hearing what As and Patel said, Luo An sneered in his heart, and his face became serious in an instant. He raised his glass, and said in a deep voice, Captain Patel, I didn't expect you to do so much for our Special Investigation Team. You have worked so hard. As and Patel picked up the glass again and smiled. It's all for everyone. It's my duty. Ding, the two clinked their glasses, raised their heads, and took a sip of wine, put down their glasses, and Luo An nodded. No problem, Captain Patel. I will definitely express my opinion to the Washington headquarters tomorrow. As and Patel raised the corner of his mouth when he heard the words, and just as he was about to speak, Luo An asked, but what conditions do you give me? Essen Patel was stunned for a moment, and then his face returned to normal, and he asked with a smile, "What do you mean by conditions?" Luo An pushed the glass aside and smiled. "I'm the first person to express my opinions to the Washington headquarters. If I don't give me some benefits, can you rest assured? Makes sense." Essen Patel's heart moved, and just as he was about to speak, Luo An added, "If it takes too long, then don't do it. It's best if you can give it to me tomorrow." After the voice fell, Essen Patel fell silent and looked at Roan quietly. Roan did not avoid it, but looked back with a smile. The air at the table was quiet for a long time. Essen Patel finally put away the smile on his face, looked at Roan coldly, and stood up without saying a word. "How rude." Looking at Essen Patel's back as he left quickly, Roan sneered with disdain, stood up and took another piece of freshly cooked steak. Essen Patel's words just now clearly meant that he wanted to use Roan as a gun and let him face the anger of the Washington headquarters. Roan was not a fool. How could he not see this clearly? So he took the opportunity to ask for benefits. In fact, he had no intention of making any comments to the Washington headquarters, but only wanted to get benefits for free from Essen Patel. Because Luo An's current goal is just to become a regular employee, whether the special investigation team is abolished or not will not have much impact on him. As long as he succeeds in becoming a regular employee, he will be the leader of the investigation team anyway. What's more, Luo An doesn't bother to use those roundabout things to get benefits for himself. The money he makes is not as much as he makes from solving cases. At first, Essen Patel seemed to be planning to agree to give Luo An benefits, but when Luo An said that it would take too long, he gave up. It is not difficult to see that the benefits Essen Patel wanted to give Luo An were just empty words. So when he heard Luo An's additional conditions, Essen Patel guessed that Luo An had seen through his thoughts. Finding that he was almost cheated by Luo An, and losing face, and finding that his plan failed, Essen Patel naturally turned around and left here. He wants to sell others and collect the money, but he also wants to do nothing, and even wants the guy who was sold to be grateful to him. After eating the new steak, Roan drank the wine in the glass, looked at the place where Essen Patel had just sat, and sneered, "This guy can't be Jewish." Silently putting Essen Patel on the blacklist in his mind, Roan, who was not very smart, was going to see if he could help Essen Patel in the next few days. After eating and drinking, Roan left the restaurant and returned to the suite and found that Mona was awake and fiddling with the computer. Hearing the sound, Mona looked up and asked, "Where did you go?" "I went to have some midnight snacks and chat with a stingy guy by the way." Roan replied with a smile, then sat next to Mona and asked, "Why did you wake up?" "Lassie and Michelle called me just now." Mona yawned with her hand covering her mouth, then pointed to the computer screen and said, "They encountered a big problem." Chapter 364 FBI Washington Headquarters. Hotel Suite. Early morning. Big problem? Hearing this, Luo An frowned. Lassie and Michelle were members of the special investigation team. Why did they not come to him, the deputy team leader, when they encountered a problem? It's not about work, it's their personal problem. Seeing that Luo An seemed to have misunderstood something, Mona hurriedly explained, "Do you still remember Lassie's actress landlord? She went back to Los Angeles yesterday and sold the house. As compensation, the motorcycle was given to Lassie for free. The new landlord no longer rents out the house and hopes that Lassie will move out as soon as possible. Lassie has no choice but to temporarily put her things at Michelle's house. The two of them have been busy for a long time today." Lassie called Mona and asked her for the landlord's phone number of the house that Mona and Luo An rented together. Lassie wanted to ask if the other party had any suitable houses at present. Okay. After listening to Mona's narration, Roan's face relaxed and he smiled. "If I had known this would happen, I would have let you stay in Los Angeles. Our rental house can also help Lassie store some things. Michelle's rental house is not big, and there are a lot of books stuffed in it. Lassie's things are all in her place. It is a problem for the two to sleep tonight. Life will always encounter unexpected things." Mona shrugged her shoulders and then suddenly remembered something and continued, "By the way, Lassie just said on the phone that not long after we got on the plane to Washington, a man went to the special investigation team office area. Roan looked puzzled when he heard this, and Mona then said that the man was John Rodriguez. He came to the special investigation team just to find Roan. He left when he heard that Roan was not there and said that he would come again when Roan returned to the special investigation team. After saying this, Mona's face was a little nervous. There won't be any problems with the kidnapping case that haven't been solved yet. Probably not. After a long pause, Luo An slowly shook his head. If there is any follow-up to the case, John will definitely contact us directly by phone. There is no need to come in person. What's going on? I don't know, and there's no need to rush. Luo An was not in a hurry. Anyway, the review of the Washington headquarters was completed today, and he and Mona would be able to return to Los Angeles tomorrow. When the time comes, they can deal with it as they come. It's 6 hours before I get up, so I'll rest first. Luo An pointed to the clock not far away, got up and walked towards the bed. This is my first time entering the Washington headquarters, so I have to leave a good impression on those people inside. Okay. Mona closed the computer and walked to the big bed next to her with Luo An. Monday, 7 in the morning, John Edgar Hoover Building, the FBI Washington headquarters. Wearing a suit and looking very refreshed and energetic, Roan walked into the building. He took a quick look around. The decoration pattern inside and outside the building gave him a rough feeling. Following the route provided by Verines, Roan soon found Verines sitting on the sofa in an office, and also saw an elderly white man sitting behind the desk. Seeing the face of the elderly white man, Roan raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled. "Good morning, Mr. Clement, Chief Verines." The elderly white man was the thigh behind Verines. "Mr. Clement, the director of the FBI Washington headquarters and special advisor to the director. You're welcome, sit down." Clement smiled slightly, stretched out his hand to signal Roan to sit down, and then said, "Verines is right. You are indeed a rare handsome guy. It seems that this is the first time we meet." Roan nodded. They had many indirect contacts through Verines before, and this direct meeting was indeed the first time. Clement didn't say much to Roan. After briefly praising Roan's performance, he left the office with his secretary and went to the White House with the FBI director. It seemed that he would not be back for a while. Seeing that Verines had no intention of leaving the office, Clement and the secretary did not say anything, so Roan did not move either. He turned to look at Verines and smiled. "Sir, you look a little tired. You should take care of yourself." "Yeah." Verines sat on the sofa, picked up the coffee on the table, and took a sip, and said lightly, "I have read the case files and reports you handled after going to Los Angeles. You did a very good job." "Thank you, sir." Facing the more familiar Verines, Roan relaxed a lot in his words. After a few simple chats, he asked about the news he got from Ezen Patel yesterday. "Sir, there is news that the Washington headquarters intends to cancel the special investigation team. Is this true or false?" "Half true and half false." Verines put down the coffee cup and said directly, "The vast majority of people in the Washington headquarters are very satisfied with the performance of most special investigation teams, and a small number of questioning voices have been suppressed. But now there is another voice, which is to continue to enhance the case handling authority of the special investigation team from major federal cities to a federal state. At present, the Washington headquarters has basically set the tone. They plan to extract 3 from the 10 special investigation teams and try to let these 3 investigation teams take charge of the cases in one state. Among the remaining 7 investigation teams, due to funding issues and the fact that several investigation teams did not perform well, the headquarters plans to cancel 2 or 3 special investigation teams and let them return to the original ordinary investigation teams. So that's how it is. After listening to Verines' narration, Luo An narrowed his eyes slightly. It seems that Ezen Patel's source of information is not accurate, and he only knows half of the situation. In addition, on the surface, the responsibilities, powers, and status of the 3 special investigation teams have been greatly improved, and the power of the team leader in charge of the investigation team has also increased a lot. However, cross-regional law enforcement is always a problem, even in the same state, because except for the state government and the county, which are in a superior subordinate relationship, other federal agencies are responsible for their own duties and are not subordinate to each other. Therefore, a federal-style phenomenon has emerged. No matter which state or city the president goes to, the governor and mayor don't care and are still busy with their own affairs. In essence, it is because they are not in a superior-subordinate relationship. It seems that the 3 special investigation teams have much more power, but the police in the place where the case occurred, the local FBI, and other local law enforcement agencies will have conflicts with these 3 special investigation teams. The cases handled by these 3 special investigation teams will also become difficult and complicated cases that these departments cannot solve, or even old cases. Luo An shook his head repeatedly. He had a small appetite and could not eat such a blessing. It would be better to let others do such a good thing. For example, Ethan Patel is not bad. At first glance, he is a man who can do great things. Very good. Hearing Luo An's statement, Vereen smiled and was very satisfied. She knew that Luo An was a smart person and would definitely be able to distinguish the pros and cons of this matter. Vereen and Luo An have the same goal now. They both plan to take this opportunity to promote Luo An from deputy team leader to team leader. Anyway, Luo An is still young and there are plenty of opportunities to continue to move up. It is safest to take one step at a time. There is no need to rush. As for whether he could be successfully converted to a regular employee, Luo An did not ask, and Vereen did not say. The fact that Mr. Clement specially met with Luo An today already explained a lot of problems. It was 8:30 soon, and there was still half an hour before the review time of 9 o'clock stipulated in the notice. Luo An stood up and left the office with Vereen. Before they had walked far, Luo An met several acquaintances. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 365, Judgment and Investigation. Returning to Los Angeles, encountering a major case. Good morning, Chief Trick Kennedy. Long time no see. Shall we have a drink together later? Chapter 221. Isn't this Captain Levis? What case are you working on? Deputy Captain Varlita, you look so beautiful after not seeing you for a few days. Chapter 224. Good morning, Chief Elmer. Why are you here at the FBI? Are you facing any new cases? Along the way, Luo An met many acquaintances. Some of them greeted him, and some greeted him. Vereen, who was standing next to him, twitched her lips when she saw this. She was speechless and had a sense of crisis. There was no doubt that Luo An was excellent, and these people were not blind. They would not compete with her for him, right? Exclamation mark. Vereen looked solemn, thinking about how to keep Luo An by her side. Other agents passing by looked at Luo An curiously, and the other 9 special investigation team leaders had complicated expressions. Most of the 9 special investigation team leaders saw Luo An in person for the first time, and they never expected that Luo An would scare them as soon as they met. The team leaders have worked for many years and have many familiar people in the Washington headquarters, but most of them are not as high ranking as the people Luo An knows. For example, Trick Kennedy, the deputy director of the Internal Threat Office of the FBI Washington headquarters. All the investigation team leaders wanted to ask Luo An how he knew him. Seeing this scene, the other investigation team leaders were just a little shocked by Luo An, while Ethan Patel, who had chatted with Luo An last night, looked extremely ugly in an instant. In Ethan Patel's opinion, Luo An knew so many people and obviously knew more about the internal situation of this review than he did. But Luo An not only did not reveal a single thing to him, but also watched him toss for a long time like watching a play. A flash of anger flashed in Ethan Patel's eyes, but now was not the time to vent. He suppressed his emotions and prepared to have a good chat with Luo An, build some relationship, and then there were 12 chairs in the waiting area. Luo An sat at the other end of the 9 chairs away from Ethan Patel and chatted with another team leader in a low voice, ignoring Ethan Patel's intention. Ethan Patel's mouth twitched. Seeing that there was an empty seat on the other side of Luo An, he stood up and was about to walk there. Suddenly, the door of the office in front of everyone opened from the inside. A young agent held a list and asked, Who is the team leader? Esan Patel from Chicago? Please enter the office. Esan Patel's eyelids twitched. He never expected that the first person would be himself. When walking towards the office door, Esan Patel subconsciously glanced at Luo An. Luo An smiled slightly and raised his arm to make a come on gesture to him. %*. Looking at Esan Patel, who entered the office with a dark face, Roan smiled slightly and continued to chat with the head of the investigation team from Miami. The so-called evaluation and inspection time was not long. In less than 20 minutes, Esan Patel walked out of the office. After several people came in and out, Roan entered the office sixth. There were 7 guys in suits and leather shoes in front of the office, 1 chief and 6 deputy, exactly as the team leader Potent Burn said before. Roan Greenwood, the deputy chief of the Special Investigations Unit from Los Angeles. Yes, sir. We have senior information. You performed well in the FBI training academy. After being assigned to the FBI New York branch, you were quickly promoted and joined the Criminal Investigation Division's Investigation Team Number 5. It hasn't been long since you were recommended to go to Los Angeles again to serve as the deputy chief of the Special Investigations Unit. You have solved many cases during your tenure. These are enough to prove that you are a capable person. The middle-aged white man sitting in the middle stopped after saying these words and looked at Roan quietly. Seeing this, Roan immediately began to talk about his own thoughts. I can grow so fast in the FBI, which is inseparable from the guidance of my superiors and the help of my colleagues. They have provided me a lot, and through words and deeds, I understand how to work in the FBI. The middle-aged white man nodded, and the other assessors began to write and draw on the paper. Roan didn't see clearly what they wrote. After the middle-aged white man finished writing, he looked up at him and continued to ask, what do you think is the most important thing for the Special Investigations Unit? Of course it is the orders from superiors, federal laws, and the crime clearance rate. Luo An remained calm, smiling, and explained his views in a leisurely tone. After listening to Luo An's words, the middle-aged white man nodded again. His true thoughts could not be seen on his face. After a few seconds of silence, he asked again, as the head of the Los Angeles branch of the Special Investigation Team, do you think the existence of the Special Investigation Team is necessary? Luo An cursed in his heart after hearing this, but his expression remained unchanged on the surface. He did not directly answer the other party's question, but explained the various impacts of the Special Investigation Team on the FBI Los Angeles branch and other law enforcement departments in Los Angeles before and after its establishment. The content was well organized and easy to understand. At the same time, Luo An also briefly introduced Potent Burn, the head of the investigation team from the Chicago branch, and praised his ideas and attitude. After listening to Luo An's narration, the middle-aged white man and others looked at each other and had no questions to ask. Deputy Team Leader Luo An Greenwood, your evaluation and inspection are over. You will receive a notification of the results within 3 days. You can leave now. Okay, sir. Luo An smiled slightly, thanked him simply, and stood up and left the office. Verines had already left, and Trick Kennedy and the others were busy. Roan saw them and chatted briefly, then left the rough-style building. On Monday afternoon, Roan and Mona flew out of Washington. Not long after arriving in Los Angeles, Roan saw John Rodriguez knocking on the door of the Special Investigation Team's office. You are really well informed. Roan took John Rodriguez into the conference room and asked with a smile, you won't send someone to keep an eye on the door of the FBI Los Angeles branch building? No. John shook his head repeatedly and then said that he and many people at the Los Angeles airport had a common friend, and this friend was called Franklin. Franklin, a well-known man in the Federation who dared to fight lightning, was famous for another reason, that his portrait had been printed on the federal 100 denomination currency. The other party is now the president of the Mueller Group, and using money to open the way is nothing. After taking a sip from the teacup, Roan stopped talking nonsense and asked directly, what on earth do you want to talk to me about? As Kara's father, I'm here to express my sincere gratitude to you. John stood up with a serious face, took out a folder from his handbag, and handed it to Roan. In addition to a legal donation of $1 million case handling funds from a company under the Mueller Group to the Special Investigation Team, there was also a personal check for $3 million, signed by John Rodriguez, Madeleine Allen, and Kara Mueller. Looking at the three surnames of the same family on the check, Roan's eyebrows jumped, and he suppressed the complaints in his mouth. Instead of accepting the check immediately, Roan crossed his legs and leaned back, looking at John, and asked with a smile, "Just a simple expression of gratitude?" As expected of Deputy Team Leader Greenwood, "I knew I couldn't hide it from you." John laughed and sat back in his chair, picked up the coffee on the table, and drank it all. He pondered for a while, and just as he was about to speak, the door of the conference room was suddenly opened, and the team leader Potent Burn walked in with a serious face, and said in a deep voice, "Roan, come with me quickly, there is a big case outside." Chapter 366, Los Angeles City Council Speaker Physical Split Case. Monday, 7 p.m., in an apartment in a high-end community in South Los Angeles. John stopped talking immediately because of the appearance of the team leader Potent Burn. He agreed with Roan to talk again next time, left the folder and check, and left the Special Investigation Team office. Roan saw this, so he took Lassie with him, and went to the crime scene with the team leader Potent Burn. At this time, the lights outside the two-story apartment were brightly lit, and more than a dozen LAPD officers were struggling to maintain order at the scene. A large number of reporters outside were clamoring non-stop, and the flashes of taking pictures never stopped. The deceased's name is Zeman. Potent Burn got out of the car, took Roan and Lassie, opened the cordon, and walked quickly towards the apartment. His face was so gloomy that it seemed like water could drip out. He is 55 years old this year. He is the most popular among the Los Angeles Council members and the Speaker of the Los Angeles City Council. "I know him." Roan didn't know much about these things, but Lassie beside him nodded and said seriously, "Zeman has spoken for the grassroots people in Los Angeles many times, and proposed many measures to benefit the grassroots people." Roan's expression did not change. It sounded like Speaker Zeman was a good person. Stepping onto the lawn outside the apartment, he asked, "What was the cause of death of Speaker Zeman?" Potent Burn's face became colder when he heard this, and he did not answer Roan directly. "You will know later." Huh. Roan's eyebrows moved. Could it be that the murderer used abuse and humiliation before killing Speaker Zeman? The moment he walked into the apartment, Roan found that he still underestimated his imagination. The living room inside the apartment was too crowded for anyone to stand. The floor was covered with solidified crimson liquid. In the middle of the living room, the 50-something Speaker Hammond was naked, with a white towel tied to the back of his head stuffed in his mouth. His eyes were bloodshot and his face was grim. In addition, up and down is not a verb but an adjective. Speaker Hammond was really centered around the waist and physically divided into two parts. The two parts were in a mess, and could not be described in words. Fouquet, son of. Seeing the mess in the living room, Lassie was shocked, and her expression instantly became extremely ugly. She subconsciously covered her mouth. Luo An was also slightly startled, and cursed in a low voice. This scene was quite shocking to Luo An, mainly because the bloody smell was too strong and Luo An's sense of smell was quite sensitive. He felt that he could hardly breathe in the living room. Turning his head to look at Potent Burn, Luo An finally understood why his face was so gloomy. Leaving the apartment living room, making way for the trace examination agents who were also horrified, Roan, Lassie and Potent Burn walked into the kitchen next door and turned their eyes to the middle-aged white man who was already vomiting at the sink and looking frighteningly pale. The middle-aged white man was named Aiden, and he was the secretary of Speaker Zeman and the first person to discover the scene and call the police. Potent Burn briefly explained a few words, left the apartment, and went outside to deal with the media. Roan and the others walked to Aiden and found that he could no longer vomit anything at this time. Lassie handed him a glass of water, patted his shoulder, and whispered, "Let's go out and talk." The kitchen is not far from the living room, and this scene is still very shocking to ordinary people. "Thank you, but no, I can do it." Trembling, Aiden took the water handed over by Lassie, thanked him, and then reluctantly shook his head to refuse the proposal. Lassie was speechless about Aiden's whole body trying to hold himself up like a noodle, but his mouth was still hard. Roan was too lazy to talk nonsense with him, and directly used physical means. to take Aiden out of the apartment and put him on the new sub of the special investigation team on the road next to it. Mainly because Roan had a keen sense of smell. He smelled a faint smell of urine on Aiden. After all, the sub was new, and it would not be good if it was dirty. Wonder of the CIA was very fast. Before Roan and Mona went to Washington, Wanda sent 3 subs and some new weapons and equipment to the special investigation team. Roan and Lassie did not mean to look down on Aiden. After all, he was an ordinary person, and it was good that he did not faint directly after seeing such a scene. How do you know I fainted? Aiden raised his head in surprise, saying that he opened the door of the apartment and saw the scene in the living room, and his eyes went black and he fainted. If it weren't for the pain of his head falling on the steps that woke him up, Aiden might have called the police much later than now. X2. Lassie rolled her eyes. Luo An didn't waste any more time and asked directly, what happened between you and Speaker Zeman today? What did you experience? This morning, Speaker Zeman called me and said he was not feeling well and needed to rest at home for a few hours. Aiden took a deep breath and began to describe his experience today in detail. Speaker Zeman has always been in poor health. This kind of thing is also normal, so I didn't care. I just followed Speaker Zeman's wishes and temporarily postponed the meeting and other things to after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At 2:30 in the afternoon, I called Speaker Zeman again, but he didn't answer. Considering that Speaker Zeman had not woken up after taking the medicine in the past, I drove here with the documents, and then. Luo An looked solemn when he heard this. There was basically no useful clue on Aiden's side. Seeing that Speaker Zeman's family had not appeared at the scene for so long after the crime, Luo An asked again, what is the situation with Speaker Zeman's family? Speaker Zeman has been separated from his wife for several years. Aiden sighed and explained, Chairman Zeman and his wife have secretly completed the divorce procedures, but they have never made it public. They have a daughter who has been working outside the Federation and has met with Chairman Zeman only a few times. Luo An was silent for a few seconds and asked in a low voice, does Chairman Zeman have other women? The murderer's methods were so cruel, and there was a high probability that there was hatred between him and Chairman Zeman, and murder of passion was also one of the possibilities. There is indeed one. Aiden was silent for a long time, looked up at the reporters in the distance, and saw that there were only Luo An and Lassie in the SUV. He lowered his voice and said, the woman's name is Corinna. She is 21 years old, and she is a student at a university in Los Angeles. Luo An and Lassie looked at each other and saw the inexplicable look in each other's eyes. The two did not say much. After Lassie asked for Corinna's general information, an agent from the trace examination department came over. The trace examination agent looked very normal. Aiden was taken away by other agents. He said to Roan and Lassie, we found that the victim's tongue was cut off. It was not found at the scene. It must have been taken away by the murderer. Any other findings? We have to wait for the autopsy results. Okay, thank you. The trace examination agent turned and left. Lassie immediately analyzed. The tongue was cut off. This represents the fate of the informant in many cases. Is it possible that this is also the case in Speaker Hammond's case? Maybe. Roan stood next to the SUV, folding his arms and looking at the brightly lit and noisy scene. After observing carefully for a moment, he took out his mobile phone and called Mona. Mona, have you found any clues in the surveillance in this community? There are clues, but not complete clues. Chapter 367 The real cause of death. Clues. At the crime scene, next to the SUV, Luo An was puzzled when he heard Mona's words. Mona on the other end of the phone didn't waste time to keep him in suspense and continued to explain, when you went to the scene, I checked the surveillance in that area and all of them were damaged at the same time. They are still under repair, so I can't find out what happened in that apartment. This area. Luo An raised his eyebrows and asked, how big is this area? Not big. It happens to be your community and the two communities on the left and right next to it. Mona smiled. It's a coincidence, isn't it? Indeed, it's too coincidental. Luo An nodded with interest and then said, I'll leave the clues in this area of surveillance to you. I believe you. No problem. Mona agreed loudly, hung up the phone and immediately started typing on the keyboard. Seeing that Roan put away his phone, Lassie asked sideways, what should we do next? Let's go visit the neighbors. Roan pointed to another apartment not far away and said, I just heard a dog barking over there. Maybe there will be some surprises for us there. Okay. Lassie nodded and immediately walked towards the neighbor's house with Roan. The next day, Tuesday, at 9:30 in the morning, the office area of the Special Investigation Team. Roan crossed his legs on the desk, leaning back in his chair, watching the TV news in front of the office area. The content of the news was exactly the murder of Speaker Seaman, and the team leader Potent Burn stood in front of the reporters and answered their questions. Last night, Roan and Lassie went to the neighbor's house, and it turned out that he was not wrong. There was indeed a dog there. But there was only one dog. The neighbor's family was not in the community these days and no one lived there. The dog was temporarily handed over to the community manager for care, and the manager did not see any useful clues at all. The puppy might have seen or heard some clues, but unfortunately no one understood what it said, so Roan had to keep it as one of the means to identify the murderer in the future. Lassie went to Speaker Seaman's office before his death to look for clues today. Michelle went to the trace examination department to wait for the autopsy report, and Mona sat on the chair and continued to type on the keyboard. From last night's busy work to now, Mona only slept for 5 hours, but she didn't find any clues. Seeing Mona's angry face, Roan handed her a cup of coffee, walked up to her, pinched her shoulders, and comforted her. Don't worry, there will always be clues. Yeah. Mona took a sip of coffee, nodded, and continued to fight with the computer. Roan saw this, and the corner of his mouth moved slightly. He thought about it, and prepared to buy more delicious food at noon. At this moment, the door of the Special Investigation Team's office was pushed open, and Michelle walked in with 2 folders. The autopsy report of the Trace Examination Department and the Crime Scene Inspection Report are out. Thank you for your hard work. Luo An then handed Michelle a cup of coffee, sat back in his chair, and asked, what is the specific situation? The Trace Examination Department at the crime scene did not find any hair, footprints, fingerprints, etc. of a third party. There were no signs of damage to the glass doors and windows of the apartment. There was no abnormality in the locks of the front and back doors. There were only the fingerprints of Speaker Seaman and Aiden on the door handle. Michelle picked up the coffee and drank it all, sat down in his chair, and said seriously, the Trace Examination Department judged that it should be Speaker Seaman who opened the door himself and brought the murderer into the apartment. It seems that the murderer is someone who made Speaker Seaman not on guard, perhaps an acquaintance, or perhaps a staff member in some aspect. Luo An supported his chin and analyzed for a few sentences, then looked at Michelle. Continue. Michelle opened the second folder and introduced. The autopsy report shows that the forensic doctor found marks of being hit by a stick on the back of Speaker Hammond's head, bruises on his wrists, caused by rope binding, needle marks on his elbows, and a small amount of nicothamide in Speaker Hammond's body. Hearing the word nicothamide, Roan frowned slightly. If I remember correctly, nicothamide seems to be a substance used to stimulate the central nervous system. That's right. Michelle's expression was very solemn. The Trace Examination Department determined that, after entering the room, the murderer first knocked down Speaker Hammond with a stick, then tied him up with a rope, and then injected Speaker Hammond with a stimulant-like drug. Where is the murder weapon? Roan continued to ask. Human bones are very hard. It is not a simple matter to split Speaker Hammond into 2 parts. What tool did the murderer use? An electric saw or a chainsaw? The Trace Examination Department determined that it was a bone-cutting knife. Michelle took out a few photos from a folder and handed them to Roan, saying, the forensic doctor found traces of bone-chopping knife on the bones. In addition, the forensic doctor speculated that, because he was injected with stimulant drugs, Speaker Hammond was still alive when the murderer attacked. The real cause of Speaker Hammond's death was not excessive blood loss, but great fear. In other words, Speaker Hammond was scared to death by the murderer's methods and the pain in his body. After taking a quick look at the photo handed by Michelle, Luo An put it aside with a grim expression. It's not that Luo An felt uncomfortable with the picture in the photo, but Luo An really couldn't understand how much hatred the murderer had with Speaker Hammond, that he would use such a cruel method. After a few seconds of silence, Luo An left his chair and walked to the front of the office area. He had forgotten to return the whiteboard to the fourth investigation team. He picked up a pen and started writing and drawing. He said as he wrote, "Even with a bone-cutting knife, it is not an easy task to cut bones. The murderer is very strong. He could be a butcher, a doctor, or a retired soldier. Judging from the surveillance near the crime scene and the fact that the murderer did not leave any useful clues at the scene, the murderer also has very sharp and excellent anti-detection capabilities. This guy's definitely not an ordinary person." Mona was immersed in the computer and did not look up. Michelle nodded repeatedly to indicate that Luo An's judgment was correct, and then added, "And there must be a great hatred between the murderer and Speaker Zeman. Otherwise the murderer would not have chosen such a time-wasting method to commit the crime and kill people." "You're right." Luo An frowned and pondered with the whiteboard pen. After a long silence, he took out his mobile phone and called Lassie. "How is your investigation going?" "Not very good." In Speaker Zeman's office, Lassie felt a headache looking at the pile of documents in front of her and said helplessly, "Chairman Zeman has done so many things since he entered politics that it is impossible to count all the people who have conflicts of interest with him. As for his enemies, they are basically all over Los Angeles. Thank you for your hard work." Luo An also knew that the interpersonal relationships of someone like Chairman Zeman must be quite complicated, so he directly asked Lassie to take all the documents in Chairman Zeman's office back to the special investigation team. For those that cannot be taken, simply write down the identity of the person who intercepted them and go back to investigate carefully. Luo An just hung up the phone. Michelle raised her mobile phone and said, "Ms. Corinna, who is related to Chairman Zeman, has been found by LAPD and sent to us. But, take her upstairs immediately. I'll wait for her in the interrogation room." "Okay." Michelle immediately got up and left the office area of the special investigation team. Luo An also threw the whiteboard marker aside and walked into an interrogation room not far away. The air in the office area instantly became quiet. Time passed by, and Mona suddenly raised her hand and shouted, "Everyone, I found a big clue." The air was silent, and Mona looked around with a puzzled look on her face, only to find that she was the only one left in the office area. %*. Mumbling a few words, Mona quickly stood up and began to contact others. The clue she just found was too important, and it might fundamentally change the direction of the investigation of this case. Chapter 368, Clues, Another Body Found. Special Investigation Team, Interrogation Room. Sitting opposite the interrogation table, Ms. Corinna sat quietly, sobbing softly. Corinna is a very mature girl. The mature here does not describe her way of doing things or her words and deeds, but her appearance is very mature. At first glance, you would not think she is only 20 years old. If you say she is 40 years old, people will believe it. Luo An and Michelle looked at each other, and they had some understanding of Speaker Hammond's preferences. "I didn't expect something like this to happen." Corinna put down the toilet paper in her hand, said with red eyes, "Zeman is a good man. He should go to heaven. Such a cruel thing should not happen to him." Luo An glanced at Michelle, and Michelle immediately handed Corinna some toilet paper, and then asked in a low voice, "We know that you and Speaker Zeman have lived together for a while. Have you found anything wrong during this period?" "Sorry, I want to make one thing clear first." Corinna stopped wiping her tears, raised her palms and said seriously, "Zeman just needs a stable home, and a woman who won't complain to him. We have never had a relationship. I never ask about Zeman's work. Every time he comes to me, we only talk about the little things in life. During this time, I have never found anything wrong with Zeman." "Okay." Corinna's answer was a little unexpected to Luo An and Michelle. After a while of questioning, the two learned that Corinna had no father since she was a child, and Zeman had no interest in sex, so the relationship between her and Speaker Zeman was hard to describe, more of a platonic relationship where both parties got what they wanted. In addition, Corinna's interpersonal relationships in college were very simple. She had no boyfriend, ex-boyfriend or secret admirer, so the possibility of her killing someone out of love was very low. "Thank you for your cooperation." After signaling Michelle to politely send Corinna away, Roan just turned around and saw Mona holding a laptop appear in front of him. "You scared me." Luo An's expression was a little speechless, but Mona ignored him and directly held the laptop and showed the computer screen to Luo An. I haven't figured out the problem with surveillance, but I found some other things. A week ago, an officer of the Federal Navy disappeared mysteriously. The military is still investigating and has not found him. The community to the left of Speaker Zeman Lives is temporarily called Community Number 2. When I checked the records of residents in Community Number 2, I found that there was a house that the naval officer secretly bought by some means. Hearing this, Luo An looked solemn and asked, "You don't want to tell me that the naval officer died in that house?" "I don't know." Mona shook her head, closed the laptop, frowned and said in a deep voice, "But before the problems with surveillance in these 3 communities, the naval officer happened to appear in a store outside the community. After the community surveillance had problems, the Federal Navy discovered that the officer was missing. The time when the surveillance problems occurred is so coincidental, I don't believe there is no connection at all." Roan's face suddenly darkened. Without hesitation, he took out his cell phone and called Lassie. "Lassie, don't come back yet. Ask a few LAPD patrolmen to go with you to check an apartment in the community next to Speaker Seaman's community." Lassie agreed. Roan hung up the phone, rubbed his temples, and sat back in his chair. Not long after, Michelle returned to the special investigation team. After hearing the news from Mona, her face also became ugly. Time moved forward by the second. After more than 40 minutes, the phone rang. Roan immediately pressed the answer button. Mona and Michelle turned their eyes to him. Lassie on the other end of the phone didn't waste any words and said in a somewhat stiff tone, "Roan, another body was found." "Fouquet." "Shit." Mona and Michelle immediately raised their hands to cover their foreheads after hearing this. Roan's expression remained unchanged and then asked, "What was the cause of death? Is it the same as Speaker Heman? Is the victim's tongue still there?" There were a lot of questions. Lassie on the other end of the phone glanced at the victim who died with his eyes open on the bed in the bedroom, turned around and left quickly with a very complicated expression, answering one by one. "The situation of this victim is different from that of Speaker Heman. His waist is fine, but the head and body are separated at the neck. As for the tongue, it was not found in the victim's mouth, nor at the scene." X2 Mona and Michelle looked at each other and saw the solemn look in each other's eyes. The most undesirable thing happened. This is a serial murder case. Mona. At this moment, Roan suddenly raised his head, looked at Mona seriously and said, "I remember there is another community with surveillance problems." Hearing this, Michelle felt a chill rushing from the lower back to her forehead. Lassie on the other end of the phone felt the hairs on her body stand up instantly and exclaimed in a low voice, "What do you mean? There is another one." Mona's face turned pale instantly and she immediately opened her laptop and tapped on the keyboard. "I'll start investigating now." "Lassie, you take the LAPD to protect the scene and wait for the agents from the trace examination department." Roan stood up and pulled Michelle towards the equipment room. "Mona, use the internet to carefully check the situation in community number 3. Michelle, come with me to community number 3 for an on-site investigation." "Okay, no problem." The new SUV is powerful and has superior performance. It only took Roan and Michelle 10 minutes to arrive at community number 3 next to Speaker Seaman's residence. After parking the car, Roan and Michelle quickly found the community manager and asked directly, "Is there any resident who hasn't appeared for a long time?" The community manager was a white man with a big belly in his 40s. Hearing Roan's question, he shook his head repeatedly. "No, there are no problems with the residents in our community during this period." Roan narrowed his eyes slightly when he heard this, and Michelle quickly stepped forward and continued to ask, "What about the families of the residents? Have there been any problems?" "Sorry, I don't know." The white man with a big belly spread his hands, looking embarrassed, saying that the people living in this community are all middle class. As a community manager, he is actually a telephone operator who helps people to solve problems when there are problems in the houses. He doesn't know much about the residents' family affairs. Beep beep. Michelle was about to speak when a police car suddenly stopped at the gate of the community, and an LAPD patrolman opened the car door and walked over. Seeing this, Roan and Michelle immediately walked towards the patrolman, showed their identities and asked, "What happened?" Seeing Roan and Michelle, 2 FBI agents. Here, the LAPD patrolman was surprised, but still explained. People in the nearby church said that the pastor did not go to lead the prayer on time today. This is the first time in 30 years. People are worried that there may be something wrong with the pastor's health, so they called the police and asked us to come here to check the situation. X2. Michelle looked at each other, and Roan immediately took out a Glock 18 from his waist and asked, "Which building is the pastor's apartment?" The LAPD patrolman was startled by Roan's action and quickly replied, "Building 11 on the left." Okay. After getting the address, Roan and Michelle immediately raised their weapons and ran quickly in the direction of the pastor's apartment. Chapter 369 Discussion in the director's office. Clues and speculations. As soon as he ran to the road outside the apartment, Luo An smelled a faint smell of blood. His face sank, and considering that the death scenes of the first 2 victims were a bit shocking, he signaled Michelle, "You go to the back door of the apartment to defend, and if you find the enemy, just shoot." Okay. Michelle didn't think too much, and immediately ran to the back door of the apartment with a pistol after hearing Luo An's order. Seeing Michelle arrive at the designated location, Luo An immediately turned on the emotional perception in his mind and found that there was no reaction in the apartment in front of him, and there was no sense of danger. With a slight sigh of relief, Luo An slowly walked into the apartment. There was nothing unusual in the living room and kitchen on the first floor. Holding a pistol, he slowly walked up to the second floor following the smell of blood. There was nothing unusual in the bedroom either. Slowly pushing open the door of the study, Luo An finally saw the victim. At this time, the study was in a mess, with books, computer fragments, etc. everywhere. The victim, like Speaker Heman, was naked, with a white towel wrapped around the back of his head stuffed in his mouth. His face was hideous, and he died with his eyes open. The difference is that the victim this time did not split into 2 parts physically. The whole person is still a whole, but his whole body is covered with bruises and swelling, and there are many marks on his head. The experienced Roan saw at a glance that the pastor was beaten to death by the murderer with a stick-like object. It is not known what kind of stick-like object it was, and no murder weapon was found at the scene. Roan put on the gloves he took out of his pocket and forced open the victim's mouth. Sure enough, the tongue inside disappeared again. No enemy was found. Soon, Michelle also came up and saw the miserable situation in the study, and his face was very ugly. It was not that he was scared by the appearance of the corpse. As an FBI, Michelle had seen many corpses before. The reason why his face was ugly was that it was now certain that this case was a very difficult serial murder case. After carefully checking the study for a long time and finding no useful clues, Roan waved to Michelle, "Call the trace examination department." Okay. Michelle took out her cell phone from her pocket. Seeing Roan start to walk out, Jinan asked, "What should we do next?" "You will guard the scene with the LAPD like Lassie and wait for the detectives from the trace examination department to arrive." Roan walked out of the pastor's apartment without looking back, saying as he walked, "I'll go talk to the team leader and see what he thinks of this case." Serial murder case. In the team leader's office, Potent Burn's eyes widened when he heard Roan's words. "Are you sure?" Roan did not continue to explain, but put the photos taken by the trace examination department at the 3 crime scenes, especially the ones where the tongues of the corpses were missing, on Potent Burn's desk. Seeing the horrible photos on the table, Potent Burn raised his hand to rub his temples and felt a headache. "I need help, sir." Seeing the expression on Potent Burn's face, Roan said without further ado, "The murderer in this case is probably not just one person, but a group of people. Our special investigation team is short-handed and urgently needs help. What do you want to do?" Potent Burn was speechless when Roan said that he didn't have enough men. Since Roan solved the bank robbery case, there has been an endless stream of people who want to join the special investigation team, and many people have come to him to talk about this. Potent Burn had also asked Roan about his thoughts in a roundabout way, but Roan always pretended not to see it, which made Potent Burn very helpless. Luo An did not keep the secret. He took out a folder from behind him and handed it to Potent Burn, saying with a smile, "Here is a list I made. There are 5 people in total. Please help me transfer them temporarily to the special investigation team to handle this case with us." Cooper, 26 years old, an agent in a department of the Department of Homeland Security. Cheney, 30 years old, an agent in the International Business Department. Winslow, 32 years old, an agent in the hostage rescue team. Patricia, 29 years old, an agent in the Victim Services Department. Anwar, 30 years old, an agent in the Counterterrorism Department. Opening the folder, the team leader Potent Bine took a quick look at the list of 5 people and the information. There was no difficulty, so he nodded and agreed. Then he thought of something and asked, I remember that you have a good relationship with the SWAT team member named Hunter Anderson. Why is he not on this list? Roan did not hide the meaning behind handing over this list. Potent Burn saw at a glance that Roan intended to take advantage of this case to select a few of these 5 people to join the special investigation team. Although he did not know how many of these 5 people Roan was going to keep, the fact that Hunter Anderson's name was not on the list still aroused Potent Burn's interest. He is not suitable. Roan shook his head and said that he had a drink with Hunter Anderson some time ago. The other party is now a captain in the SWAT team because of his excellent performance. Because of the death of his cousin and the death of his aunt due to excessive grief, Hunter Anderson, who has no relatives, no girlfriend, and no worries, is now more radical in his style of action. Roan talked about the special investigation team while drinking some time ago, and Hunter Anderson refused Roan's recruitment. Hunter said that he likes the life in the SWAT team now. Fighting, saving people and the sound of gunfire made him find the meaning of life. Speaking of Hunter Anderson, Roan frowned. There are obvious problems with his current mental state. I helped him find a psychologist, but the special investigation team is no longer suitable for him. What Roan needs now is a team member who takes the overall situation into consideration and is brave and resourceful, rather than a berserker who is more desperate than him. Maybe Hunter Anderson can adjust his mentality and emotions later, but as the head of the special investigation team, Roan can't leave time to wait for him. Okay. After listening to Roan's description, Potent Burn frowned slightly and prepared to turn around and talk to the head of the SWAT team about the psychological condition of the frontline team members. Putting this matter aside, Potent Burn crossed his hands on the table and asked seriously, Roan, you just said that the murderer of this serial murder case might be a group of people. Do you have any basis? If the murderer is one person, then he is too omnipotent. Roan picked up the photos of the trace examination department again and explained. The murderer has a lot of things to do. Surveillance video, the living habits of the 3 victims, personal information, the flow of people in the 3 communities, preparing the murder weapon. He talked about a lot of things that the murderer needs to do. Under so many conditions, the time interval is so short, the murderer's methods are not only cruel and violent, but also have not left any useful clues. Roan shook his head repeatedly. Killing and killing are not the same thing at all. The former is easy and simple, while the latter is complicated and troublesome. Okay, this case is handed over to you. Potent Burn stopped talking nonsense. After confirming the help Roan needed again, he took out another folder and handed it to Roan, smiling. This is a notice from the Washington headquarters. Oh. Seeing the smile on Potent Burn's face, Roan raised his eyebrows and had some guesses in his heart. Just as he was about to open the folder, there was a sudden knock on the door of the team leader's office. Before Potent Burn could say anything, the door was pushed open. Roan and Potent Burn saw that it was Lassie. Without giving them a chance to ask questions, Lassie said in shock, Sorry, sir, but there's a new body outside. Chapter 370, a terrifying new crime scene. Fouquet. After hearing what Lassie said, Roan didn't bother to continue chatting with Potent Bine. He nodded at Potent Bine and immediately walked out of the team leader's office with the folder. In the corridor, Roan took Lassie to the elevator in a hurry and asked as they walked, What exactly happened? 10 minutes ago, LAPD went to a house to investigate based on a report and found a body in the room of that family. The two walked into the elevator together, and Lassie's face looked very bad. People die or go missing every day in Los Angeles. When LAPD didn't see the body, they just thought it was an ordinary case. But the tongue of the body disappeared, right? Walking out of the elevator, Roan took over Lassie's words, walked quickly to the special investigation team, and asked at the same time, what did the victim's death scene look like? What was the cause of death? Lassie shook her head and followed Roan into the special investigation team. I don't know. LAPD didn't say. They just urged us to let the people from the trace examination department to deal with the scene. But I asked a female LAPD patrol officer, and I learned from her that several patrol officers who saw the situation at the scene of the crime vomited. Roan's eyes twitched. He motioned Lassie to contact the trace examination department quickly, then looked at Mona in the office area and asked, Mona, how is the investigation of the first 3 victims going? Investigating. Mona typed frantically on the computer keyboard and answered without looking up. The first victim, the Speaker of the Parliament, was named Seaman. The second victim was a naval officer, and the third victim was a church pastor. These 2 people have different surnames, but their first names are both James. On the surface, there is no connection between the 3 people, but they have one thing in common. They are all very rich, and there is some information about them in private that I can't find for the time being. After Lassie contacted the trace examination department, she walked out of the equipment room. Hearing Mona's words, she casually said, the murderer may be jealous of the rich, or these 3 did something to hurt the murderer or the murderer's family. A case of revenge or retaliation. There is a certain possibility. Luo An took the equipment handed to him by Lassie and put it all on his body. He said to Mona, you continue to look for the connection between the first 3 victims. When Michelle comes back, let her go to the trace examination department and wait for the autopsy report from the pastor and the naval officer. Mona didn't look back, picked up the coffee, and drank it all. Okay. The sub sped through the streets of Los Angeles like a black lightning and arrived at the crime scene of the 4th case after more than 10 minutes. What surprised Luo An was that the crime scene this time was not a high-end community or a single-family apartment for the middle class, but an ordinary building where ordinary people in Los Angeles live. The kind with 4 to 5 families on one floor. Walking up to the 4th floor, where the crime scene was located, Luo An's nose moved slightly, and he immediately smelled an indescribable smell of blood and stench. There was also a stronger smell of vomit at the foot of the stairs. *%. Luo An's face changed, and he cursed in a low voice. He endured the discomfort and walked forward, took out the FBI's golden badge, and showed his identity to the 2 LAPD at the door. Then, in the fearful and admiring eyes of the 2 patrolmen, Luo An and Lassie put on professional gloves and shoe covers and slowly walked into the room. Just after entering the door of the room, Luo An keenly discovered that the gap of the house still had been treated. It seemed that the murderer did not want the smell to spread out of the room. Continue walking forward. There is a bathroom on the left-hand side. There is nothing unusual inside. Past the bathroom, it is the living room of the room. There are 3 crimson sofas arranged in a triangular shape in the living room, and opposite the sofa is a TV with a lot of dust. Luo An and Lassie slowly walked to the front of the largest sofa in the center. The next second, Lassie's pupils shrank, and her face changed. She covered her mouth and walked out of the room quickly. She didn't vomit, but the impact was a bit strong, so she needed to slow down. Sitting on the crimson sofa was a middle-aged white bald man with a white towel wrapped around his head, stuffed in his mouth, his eyes wide open, and his face ferocious. From the neck of this bald man down to his lower abdomen, the skin of the entire front part including the arms has disappeared, just like a shirt, folded flat and placed on the coffee table in front of the victim. And on the skinless body, many insects are crawling on it. Looking at the miserable state of the victim, Luo An frowned slightly, and after a long silence, he began to carefully check other situations in the room. Not long after, several detectives from the trace examination department arrived here, and then, they didn't vomit. After all, they were professionals, but their faces were full of shock. After all, this kind of crime scene is rare. Thank you for your hard work. Luo An stretched out his hand and shook hands with the detectives from the trace examination department, then pointed to the windows of the room and said, the gaps in these windows have been processed by the murderer, most likely to prevent the smell from escaping from the room. If you check carefully, you should be able to find useful clues in this regard. No problem. Looking at Luo An, who had nothing on his face and remained calm, the faces of several detectives from the trace examination department wearing masks were full of admiration. After leaving the crime scene, Lassie in the corridor immediately came up and briefly introduced the information she had just obtained from the neighbor. The victim's name is Butters. He is 39 years old, has no wife and children, is an alcoholic, has brought his street stepdaughter home to spend the night many times, and works in a leather factory as an ordinary worker. He doesn't sound like a rich man. After calmly glancing at the vomit at the stairs, Roan took Lassie to the window at the other end, opened the window to get some fresh air, and asked, "Is there any video surveillance?" "No." Lassie spread her hands. The person in charge of the building said that there were surveillance cameras, but the residents in this building do all kinds of things. They said that the existence of surveillance cameras is an invasion of their privacy, so one surveillance camera after another is broken, and over time no one will install surveillance cameras for free for others to break for fun. This is really in line with the federal spirit of freedom. Roan shook his head speechlessly, took a deep breath of fresh air, and didn't smell any sweetness. He patted Lassie on the shoulder and walked towards the stairs. "Let's go back to the special investigation team first and talk about it after the trace examination department finishes its work." Lassie quickly followed Luo An, and on the stairs, she whispered, "I heard from Mona that you plan to transfer 5 people from your department to handle this case together. Among these 5 people, how many do you plan to keep in our special investigation team in the end?" "I don't know. It depends on the situation," Luo An answered casually. "Maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe 3. Anyway, our special investigation team has 7 people." Lassie nodded thoughtfully, and then suddenly thought of something, smiled and said, "You directly summoned 5 people this time. Could one of them be the murderer of this case? I saw that this is how it is played in TV dramas. If there is really one of them who is the murderer of this case, I will go buy a lottery ticket immediately. If I win 1 billion, I will give you $10. Opening the door of the SUV, Luo An thought for a while, and closed it again, and said to Lassie, "By the way, go to the factory where Butters works to find out the situation. Make sure to find out when Butters started to lose contact." "No problem." Lassie nodded in agreement and immediately started the SUV and drove away. Luo An did not rush back to the special investigation team. The 4 victims were found so quickly that he did not have the opportunity to think carefully. Luo An planned to walk around and think about the case carefully. Chapter 371 Promotion to Team Leader, Case Analysis, Clues, Discovery. Wednesday, 9 AM, in the office area of the Special Investigations Unit. Team Leader Potent Burn was very quick. Roan gave him the list yesterday afternoon, and he sent all the people to the Special Investigations Unit this morning. At the front of the office area, Roan briefly introduced the identities of the 5 men and women in suits to Mona, Lassie and Michelle. Cooper, 26 years old, from the Department of Homeland Security, with a standard federal grin on his face and a very handsome hairstyle. Cheney, 30 years old, from the International Business Department, expressionless, with an open suit, looks very refined. Winslow, 32 years old, from the hostage rescue team, has a buzz cut, a head taller than Roan, and his muscles are not as exaggerated as Ryder, but they are also very visually impactful. Patricia, 29 years old, from the Victim Services Department, has a few freckles on her face, giving people a very friendly feeling. Anwar, 30 years old, from the Counterterrorism Department, also has a buzz cut and a long scar on his neck. Although he is smiling, the first impression is that this guy is not easy to mess with. The 5 people chosen by Roan all have good marksmanship, fighting skills, tactical judgment and other abilities. The only differences are their personalities, thinking patterns and professional judgments. Roan then briefly introduced Mona, Lassie and Michelle to the 5 people. Finally, Roan took out the folder that the team leader Potent Burn gave him yesterday. The folder contained a notice issued by the Washington headquarters, which stated that Roan Greenwood, deputy team leader of the Special Investigation Team of the FBI Los Angeles branch, was officially promoted to become the team leader of the Special Investigation Team. Not only that, Roan also found out from Verinis last night that team leader Ethan Patel of the Chicago branch and 2 other unlucky guys, their investigation team was successfully promoted to be responsible for a difficult case in a state. Great. I knew it. Clap, clap, Hearing the news of Roan's promotion, Mona and Lassie immediately cheered. Michelle was excited and clapped repeatedly, and the 5 new agents had different expressions, but they all smiled and clapped vigorously. Everyone, let's not waste any more time talking nonsense. Let's just hurry up and deal with the case at hand. Luo An didn't waste too much time on this matter. He waved his hand and signaled the 5 new agents to take a seat. He pulled over the whiteboard and began to introduce the clues and information currently at hand. Victim number 1, Seaman William, 55 years old, Speaker of the Los Angeles City Council, died by physically splitting into 2 parts. Victim number 2, James Hunter, a naval officer, 40 years old, died by having his head separated from his body. Victim number 3, James Smith, a church pastor, 49 years old, was beaten to death with a stick. Victim number 4, Butters Johnson, a leather factory worker, 39 years old, died by having his skin peeled off. After briefly describing these basic information, Roan turned his gaze to Michelle and asked, "What did the trace examination department say?" "The autopsies of the 4 victims have been completed." Michelle stood up from his chair, holding a folder in his hand, and said loudly, "First, let's talk about the similarities. All 4 victims have needle marks on their bodies, and nicotinamide, a substance that stimulates the central nervous system, has been detected in their bodies. This shows that the murderer is indeed the same person, and injected them into the victims' bodies while they were still alive, and then began to torture and kill the victims. Next is the difference. The 4 victims died at different times. The autopsy report showed that the first person to die was Butters Johnson, a leather factory worker, who died about 19 days ago. The second was James Hunter, a naval officer, who died about 7 days ago. The third was Seaman William, the Speaker of the Parliament, who died around the morning of the day before yesterday. The fourth was James Smith, a church pastor, who died around early yesterday morning. But, thank you for your hard work. Nodding and motioning Michelle to sit down, Roan saw the 5 new agents, except for Cheen, who was wearing an open suit, and the other 4 were all bowing their heads and taking notes seriously. He blinked and turned his gaze to Mona. "What clues have you found here?" "There are no clues on the economic level." Mona did not get up. She sat in her chair, looking at the computer in front of her and narrating. "The Speaker of the Parliament, the naval officer and the church pastor have a lot of savings on the surface, and they also have some money in private. The sources of most of these money have been found out, and there is no direct connection. As for the surveillance, I'm sorry, the murderer used physical means to destroy the camera, not network means, and I couldn't find any useful clues." "No, this is a useful clue." Luo An supported his chin and analyzed. "There are quite a few surveillance cameras in those 3 communities, and some of them are very hidden. Since the other party used physical means to destroy them, on the one hand, it means that the other party has either carefully observed the area, or has the installation and distribution records of those surveillance cameras." And the trace examination department also determined that the 4 victims took the initiative to open the door for the murderer. Hearing Luo An's words, Mona and Michelle frowned and thought, while Lassie raised her hand and said loudly, "This shows that the murderer definitely has an identity that makes it easy for people to let down their guard, or the murderer pretended to be this identity and let others open the door for him." "You are absolutely right." Luo An agreed with Lassie's idea very much, and then asked, "Lassie, did you find any clues yesterday?" "Of course." Lassie chuckled, pulled out an inquiry record from the desk, and said, "I learned from a colleague of Butters Johnson, a worker in the leather factory, that Butters lost his male ability due to an accident. But I heard from Butters' neighbors before that Butters often brought his street stepdaughters home, and these 2 clues were obviously in conflict. So I went to the streets to find those stepdaughters, and learned from one of them that they did not use normal means to serve Butters, but used other objects to beat and torture him at Butters' request." XN After Lass's voice fell, the air in the office area was quiet for a few seconds, and Luo An's face remained unchanged. "What do you mean?" "Butters, a leather factory worker, has no male ability. The church pastor has been alone for many years. The naval officer has no girlfriend, and you have met the female friend of the Speaker of the Parliament, but they have never had a relationship with each other, and they call it platonic love. Lassie shrugged and threw the inquiry record in her hand back on the table. Don't you think these are coincidences? Everyone in the office understood what Lassie meant, and Michelle frowned and said, "You mean the sexual orientation of these 4 victims is problematic?" "Not necessarily." Lassie shook her head and said, "They may not all have this orientation, but it is possible that they have all been to fixed places where homosexual groups go. Write down this clue and investigate it later." Roan motioned to Michelle to record Lassie's thoughts and then asked, "Are there any other clues?" Mona, Lassie and Michelle shook their heads. Roan turned his gaze to the 4 new agents. "What do you think about this case?" Upon hearing this, An Shen, who was from the International Business Department and was wearing an open suit, immediately raised her hand, attracting the attention of everyone in the office. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 372 Analysis of the 5 new agents, Luo An's order. I noticed that these 4 crime scenes all have the same conditions related to the murderer. In the office area of the Special Investigation Team, An Shen, wearing an open suit, stood up from her chair, facing the eyes of everyone, and analyzed expressionlessly. First, after the murderer controlled the victims, he used white towels to block the victims' mouths. Second, the murderer cut off and took away the tongues of all 4 victims. This must be related to the behavior or thoughts of the 4 victims before they died. 80% of serial killers in the world have a sense of ritual. At present, when there is no connection between the 4 victims, I think it is a direction of investigation to explore the reasons behind the murderer's tongue-cutting behavior in this case, and find the source of those white towels. Good. Luo An nodded, motioned An Shen to sit down, and recalled her information in his mind. The most prominent point is that An Shen has a very good memory, although not to the point of photographic memory. No matter whether it is Eastern or Western faces, as long as An Shen takes a look, she will not make mistakes for a long time. The memory ability of numbers, letters, etc. is even more sharp and powerful. Mona and Michelle glanced at Cheyenne briefly, while Lassie glanced at Cheyenne and licked her lips. Roan pretended not to see anything and continued to ask the remaining 4 agents, "What do others think about this case? We can investigate the source of the nicothamide substances in the bodies of the 4 victims." Cooper, who had a handsome hairstyle, raised his hand first, then stood up, looked at everyone and smiled. "Nicothamide is not something that can be obtained casually. California has certain controls on this type of drugs involving the central nervous system. I think we can investigate from this aspect." "Very good." Roan nodded with satisfaction. Cooper smiled and sat back in his original position. Anwar, who had a scar on his neck, was about to get up, and Winslow, a muscular man with a short haircut, stood up before him and said in a deep voice, "I have no opinion on the direction of the next investigation. I just want to briefly explain my views on this case. First of all, victim number 1, the Speaker of the Parliament, was cut in half. This is not an easy task, because human bones are not generally hard, and the murderer must be very strong and enduring. Secondly, victim number 4, a leather factory worker, was skinned to death. Skinning is a job that requires very high skills and most people cannot do it. The murderer must have worked in a related industry and had similar experience, or the person who attacked victim number 4 is not the same person who attacked the Speaker of the Parliament. Winslow smiled at Roan after he finished speaking and then sat back in his seat. Mona and Michelle frowned slightly when they heard this, and Lassie asked directly, "You mean the murderer in this case is not just one person? It's a gang crime?" Roan has not yet told Mona and the other 2 what he thinks about the case. When he heard Lassie's question, he folded his arms over his chest and looked at Winslow, wanting to hear his answer. An intuition. Seeing the suspicious look on Lassie's face, Winslow pursed his lips and said seriously, "If the murderer of this case is only one person, then he not only has a lot of skills and abilities, but also has extraordinary anti-reconnaissance capabilities. Otherwise, with the ability of team leader Greenwood and the trace examination department, it is impossible that no clues were found. If it is a gang crime, brainstorming and cooperating to erase the traces they left behind, I think this situation is more likely. Lassie and others began to ponder, and Luo An was also thinking, but he was not thinking about this case, but recalling Winslow's identity information. There is one police officer for every 900 people in the Federation, one FBI SWAT for every 30 police officers, and only one FBI hostage rescue team member for every 55 FBI SWAT officers. Winslow, who came from the hostage rescue team, is 32 years old this year, but has served for more than 6 years. Being able to live safely in a hostage rescue team, which is more torturous than the SWAT team, for such a long time without any noticeable scars on his body, not only proves that Winslow is very strong, but also proves that Winslow definitely has unique skills. Just now Winslow said that his intuition told him that the murderer of this case was not one person. Luo An narrowed his eyes and rubbed his fingers calmly. He planned to ask Mona to use some tricks to retrieve all the combat records of Winslow. I remembered something. When the officer was quiet, Anwar, who was a step behind and had a scar on his neck, stood up and said to everyone, I remember that the trace examination department can test the composition of the soil at the crime scene and infer which area the murderer came from or what items are in the area where the murderer exists, based on the composition of the soil, and finally find the murderer. There are now 4 victims in this case. We can carefully check the 4 crime scenes to see which substances should not appear at the crime scene, so as to find the murderer's traces. It's a good direction for investigation. Luo An smiled and glanced at Anwar. He didn't expect that the other party also knew about solving cases with technology. 4 of the 5 new agents expressed their opinions. Luo An, Mona and others turned their eyes to the last agent, Patricia, who had freckles on her face. I have a little idea. Seeing everyone's gaze, Patricia hesitated for a few seconds, then stood up and said, the Speaker of the Parliament was murdered the day before yesterday, and the church pastor was murdered yesterday, with a very short time interval. The leather factory worker was murdered 19 days ago, and the naval officer was murdered 7 days ago. The interval between the 2 times is a bit long. So, could there be other people who were killed by the murderer, but have not been discovered by us? The office area was silent. Although everyone did not want this to happen, they had to admit that the probability of this happening was very high. Clap, clap, clap. Roan clapped his hands to attract the attention of everyone in the office area, walked to the whiteboard, and said loudly, everyone's analysis just now is good. Let me assign the next investigation tasks. Cheney, Cooper, you 2 are responsible for the white towels and nicotinamide that appeared at the crime scene. Find out their buyers and sources. Winslow, Lassie, the 2 of you, and the detectives from the trace examination department will carefully investigate whether there are other substances that should not be there at the 4 crime scenes. Anwar, Patricia, Michelle, the 3 of you will contact the relatives and friends of the 4 victims and carefully investigate the personal information of the 4 victims. Investigate from birth whether they have taken the same car, the same plane, traveled to the same place, eaten in the same restaurant. Be sure to find out all their experiences for me. The murderer targeted the 4 of them, and there is definitely a connection between them. We must find this connection. Mona, you will investigate the report records received by the LAPD from 19 days ago to 7 days ago, focusing on missing and similar cases. No problem. Okay. Understood. As soon as Luo An finished speaking, everyone in the office area responded loudly, picked up their equipment, and left the special investigation team. The 5 new agents all had at least 3 years of work experience in their original departments, so the tasks Luo An assigned to them were not difficult. Fortunately, I got a few more subs from 1D before. Looking at the backs of the agents leaving quickly, Luo An's face was full of pride, and he sighed. So this is what it feels like to order your subordinates to do things a needle doesn't poke. After sighing, Luo An put away his smile, walked back to the whiteboard, and began to think seriously. What is the connection between the 4 victims? Why did the murderer kill them and cut off their tongues? Chapter 373 Thinking, Judgment, New Victims, Problems. Wednesday, 11:15 AM, Special Investigation Team, Office Area. Mona sat at her workstation, typing away at the keyboard. With the sound of the keyboard clacking, Luo An held a teacup and carefully looked at the photos and information of the 4 victims on the whiteboard. Generally speaking, cutting the tongue is a punishment for the informer, which means that the other party said something that should not be said. The identities of the 4 victims are the speaker, the pastor, the Navy officer, and the tannery worker. The first 3 victims were of higher status and there may be a connection, but the tannery worker and these 3 are not from the same world at all. Given the very rigid class situation in the Federation, if nothing unexpected happens, the tannery worker may never be associated with the first 3 in this life. Then there are the ways of death among the 4 victims. The speaker was beheaded, the officer was beheaded, the priest was beaten to death with clubs, and the tannery worker was skinned. The only one whose identity is related to the way of death is the tannery worker, who was the only one who often came into contact with animal fur during his lifetime, and his skinning can be regarded as the murderer's punishment for him. But if you think about it this way, apart from the military identity of the naval officer, which can barely be linked to beheading, there is obviously no connection between the identities of the other 2 victims and the way they died. This is a dead end. Putting down the teacup, Roan shook his head. This road is not feasible, and he can't continue to waste time on it. Turning around, Roan looked at Mona and asked casually, "How is the investigation going?" At this time, an hour had passed since the other agents left the special investigation team. Roan planned to let Mona take a break and help him get Winslow's action file later. Roan was very interested in Winslow's intuition. There are too many people missing in Los Angeles every day. LAPD receives reports of missing persons every day, and there are even more reports of missing persons. Hearing Roan's words, Mona spread her hands, leaned back in her chair with a helpless look on her face, closed her eyes and rested. From 19 days ago to 7 days ago, LAPD received a total of more than 50 reports of missing persons. I found 3 people who lost contact first and then disappeared, and there are also people who have other residences secretly without telling their family and friends. I have just called LAPD for help to check the situation at those residences. Thank you for your hard work. Roan handed Mona a cup of coffee, walked behind her to help her massage her shoulders, and smiled. I will reward you well tonight. Humph. Thinking of the scene of sore legs during the half-day holiday, Mona immediately leaned forward to avoid Roan's hands, then snorted coldly, and threw Roan a pair of white eyes. Roan, who was going to ask Mona whether she wanted to eat steak or lamb chops tonight, was slightly stunned by her actions. Seeing the expression on Mona's face, he realized that she had misunderstood what he meant. Luo An rolled his eyes speechlessly. It was all Lass's fault for saying nonsense all day long. Mona was corrupted by her. Lassie sneezed violently in the distance. Ding-ling-ling. Just when Luo An was about to explain what he really meant, the landline on Mona's desk suddenly rang. He pressed the answer button and heard a trembling voice of an LAPD patrolman on the other end of the phone. Special investigation team. We found a body in the house you mentioned. Hearing this, Luo An and Mona's faces instantly sank. Half an hour later, in a community in southeastern Los Angeles. This community is mainly inhabited by the middle class in Los Angeles. The houses are nice, and basically there are 2 households per floor. Luo An drove a brand new SUV with Mona to the community. After parking the car, Luo An took a look at the SUV and laughed. The special investigation team originally had 2 SUVs, plus the 3 SUVs that were stolen from Wanda. There were a total of 5 at this time. The 5 new agents went out to investigate clues this time, all driving old SUVs. Only Lass's group drove one of the 3 new SUVs. Roan was very satisfied with the new agents. Walking into the community, Roan and Mona took the elevator to the crime scene on the 6th floor, took out the golden badge to show their identities, and slowly walked into the room. This room is very large. As soon as you enter the door, you can see the spacious and bright living room. The things in the living room are a bit messy, and there is a lot of dust on the debris on the ground. Roan and Mona can tell at a glance that there has been a fight here. Walking into the living room, and turning right and walking a few steps, you will see the bedroom of this room. Before you reach the bedroom, a bloody smell hits you in the face and drills into Roan's nostrils. Walking to the door of the bedroom with Mona, looking inside, a red world suddenly appeared in front of them. The overall decoration style of the bedroom is mainly white, which is the most common color in Los Angeles, but at this time, the walls around are covered with bloodstains. There is a big bed in the middle of the bedroom. There is no one on the bed, but the original brown sheets have been stained black by blood. Under the big bed, a tattered corpse lay curled up there, with knife wounds all over its body, and the ground was covered with coagulated blood. Seeing the scene in the bedroom, Mona's face immediately darkened, and Luo An frowned. With his experience, he could immediately see that the newly discovered victim was hacked to death by the murderer with a knife. Pulling Mona away, waving his hand to signal the detectives of the trace examination department to enter the bedroom to check the situation, Roan took Mona back to the living room, carefully inspecting the items in the room, and asked, "Mona, what is the personal information of this victim?" Matthew Modlin, 43 years old, works in the Los Angeles Tax Bureau. Mona opened the laptop, looked at the information inside and explained. He was found missing by his colleagues 14 days ago and reported to the police. This guy likes gambling and is a frequent visitor to Las Vegas. Because of gambling, Matthew's wife and daughter have left him. His colleagues also know about Matthew, so the LAPD just conducted a simple investigation and determined that Matthew ran away for money. Roan was not interested in the character and life experience of gamblers, but he was very puzzled why a gambler like Matthew had such a house that no one else knew about. Nominally, this house is Matthew's for his daughter. Mona spread her hands, saying that Matthew bought this house before he got addicted to gambling, but Matthew did not tell his wife about this house. Matthew had been gambling for many years, and this house had always been his trump card. Over the years, the house changed hands many times, but it finally returned to Matthew. And then he died here. Luo An shook his head. Being addicted to gambling is a road of no return. If the tongue in Matthew's mouth in the bedroom had not disappeared, he would have thought that this was a revenge by Matthew's enemies, knowing Matthew's life experience. Continuing to inspect the house, as Luo An expected, he still didn't find any useful items. At this time, the detective from the trace examination department also came out. Mona hurriedly asked, "Did you find anything?" The detective from the trace examination department shook his head and said, "Not at the moment. It will take some time to conduct a detailed investigation on the scene." "Okay, thank you for your hard work." Mona was a little helpless. She turned around and found Luo An standing in front of the French window in the living room, looking quietly into the distance. She walked to Luo An and followed his gaze to see across. It was a church. Mona was puzzled. "Luo An, what did you find?" Luo An pondered for a while, with a half smile on his face, and asked, "Mona, except for the priest, do the other victims have faith?" Chapter 374, Clues from various detectives, and a new victim appears. Wednesday, 1:30 p.m., the living room of the fifth victim's room. When Luo An was inspecting the living room of the crime scene, he had been thinking about a question. Why did the murderer use so many different methods to kill people? For those serial killers with records in the federal government, most of the killing methods are the same every time they kill people. The behavior is planned and repetitive, and the killer's own iconic items or other situations will be left at the crime scene. In this serial murder case, the murderer took the victim's tongue every time, but the way of killing the victim was different each time. 5 victims, 5 methods were used respectively. Since there is no connection between the victims now, Luo An decided to focus on the methods used by the serial killer to commit crimes. The reason why serial killers commit crimes continuously is always to satisfy some kind of desire of their own. The killer in this case must have a reason that the killer thinks is necessary to use 5 methods to kill people. Then at this time, the reasons for love killing, revenge killing, money killing and other ordinary cases can be thrown aside and replaced by political inclinations, religious beliefs, thoughts and behaviors. And I feel more and more that the deaths of these 5 victims have a stronger sense of ritual. Seeing Mona's puzzled face in front of the French window, Luo An explained in a deep voice, "The sense of ritual is often related to religion, isn't it?" "That's right." After listening to Luo An's explanation, Mona suddenly realized and nodded repeatedly while holding the laptop. The people of the Federation are simple and honest, and there are many talented serial killers. In addition to some people with natural and antisocial personalities, there are also many serial killers who kill people because of religious beliefs. But, among these 5 victims, only the pastor is a standard believer of Christianity. The Speaker of the Parliament counts as half a believer, as he occasionally attends church services. Mona opened her laptop, tapped a few times, and said with a frown, a naval officer, a leather factory worker, and a tax worker, all 3 of them are non-believers. Then give up investigating the beliefs of the 5 victims, and turn to investigating the doctrines of those cults in the Federation. At this moment, Roan's cell phone suddenly rang, and he said to Mona, see if there is any cult whose doctrine states that killing people in this way can make one become a god after death. Mona nodded and continued to investigate. Roan pressed the answer button. This is Roan. It's me, Michelle. Michelle on the other end of the phone said that she, Anwar, and Patricia were currently on the outskirts of the community where the 4th victim, a leather factory worker, lived. Anwar and Patricia found a clue. Michelle handed the phone to Anwar, who took the phone and said seriously, team leader, Patricia and I learned in a store near the community where the crime occurred, that a black car had been parked on the road diagonally opposite the community for a few days. After the leather factory worker died, the car disappeared. Not only that, the owner of the store also told us that he saw a LAPD open the car door and get into the car one night. Luo An's expression moved. LAPD. Yes, an LAPD. The store owner said that he didn't see the LAPD's face clearly, but the other party was very tall and strong, and a white male. The person on the other end of the phone changed to Patricia, and she explained, I remember that in these cases, the victims took the initiative to open the door and invite the murderer into the house. If the other party is an LAPD, then it makes sense. It doesn't have to be a real LAPD. If the murderer has LAPD clothes or badges as proof, he can do this. Luo An narrowed his eyes slightly, simply praised the 3 people on the other end of the phone, and then hung up. The detectives from the Trace Examination Division needed some time to process the scene, so Roan started the SUV and took Mona back to the direction of the Special Investigation Team. On the way, Roan's cell phone rang again, and it was Lassie and Winslow on the other end of the line. Roan, I found something. Lassie on the other end of the phone said without any nonsense, remember the towels stuffed in the mouths of the 4 victims? The trace examination detectives detected traces of sodium hypochlorite on the towels in the mouths of the Speaker of the Parliament and the church pastor. There was no such thing at the crime scene. Either these towels had been in contact with sodium hypochlorite before the murderer bought them, or there was sodium hypochlorite in the places where the murderer had stayed. Sodium hypochlorite. Hearing this word, Roan's killer ability emerged again. If I remember correctly, this thing seems to be the main ingredient of disinfectant. Yes. Lassie's voice disappeared, and the voice on the other end of the phone became Winslow. Sodium hypochlorite is a strong oxidizing bleaching agent, mainly used for disinfection and sterilization. It is a common household washing bleach. In addition, sodium hypochlorite can also interfere with the detection of bloodstains at the crime scene by luminol to a certain extent. Good. Roan nodded. It seems that Winslow, who came from the hostage rescue team, has a lot of knowledge reserves. He continued, what are you going to do next? Sheen and Cooper are currently investigating the presence of nicotinamide in the victims' bodies. Winslow said, Lassie and I will investigate the source of these towels next. With the clue of sodium hypochlorite, we may be able to find something. Okay. Roan nodded and hung up the phone. Like adrenaline, nicotinamide is a high alert drug. It is not easy for ordinary people to get them easily. But in the capitalist Free Federation, it is not very difficult for some people to get them. It will take some time for Sheen and Cooper to start from this aspect. The new sub arrived downstairs of the FBI Los Angeles branch. After parking the car in the parking lot, Roan and Mona just got out of the car, and his cell phone rang again. This time, it was not the Special Investigation Team agent who called Roan, but the head of the 4th Investigation Team, Morton York. Good afternoon, Captain Morton. After pressing the answer button, Luo An chuckled and asked, what can I do for you? Luo An's mind raced, and he suddenly remembered the few whiteboards at the front of the Special Investigation Team's office area. He had borrowed them from Investigation Team number 4, and had forgotten to return them. Good afternoon, Team Leader Greenwood. Congratulations on your promotion to full-time position. The words of Mortimer York, the leader of the number 4 investigation team on the other end of the phone, were neither salty nor bland. He said congratulations, but there was no congratulations in his tone. He went on, our number 4 investigation team just took on a case that you might be interested in. Luo An's expression moved, and he asked in a deep voice, could it be that the victim's tongue is missing? Mortimer York chuckled, as expected of the leader of the special investigation team. Your guess is really accurate. Rolling his eyes speechlessly, Luo An opened the car door and got in the car again and asked directly, where? Glancing at the bloody scene at the crime scene, Mortimer York turned his head to look at the beautiful scenery outside the house and said in a light voice, a community in West Hollywood, not far from the building of our FBI Los Angeles branch. Okay, I'll be there right away. After hanging up the phone, Luo An found that Mona was putting her laptop on the hood of the car, typing away, with an ugly look on her face. Seeing Luo An looking at her, Mona stopped and looked up. Luo An, your guess is correct. This case is indeed related to religion, and the murderer may continue to kill many more people. Chapter 375, Discovering the Connection, Specific Reasons, and Teachings. Get in the car first. Roan waved his hand to signal Mona to sit in the passenger seat quickly. The sub drove out of the parking lot quickly and headed for the place Mortimer York mentioned. After overtaking several passers-by, Roan asked, what's going on specifically? Do you know the 12 disciples of Christianity? Mona waved her hands on the passenger seat and explained, they are the 12 followers of Jesus recorded in the Bible. Roan didn't know much about Christianity, but he knew one thing, they are the people in the painting of the Last Supper, right? There is a betrayer named Judas in it. Yes, that's them. Mona nodded and said in a heavy tone, based on your guess, I just checked the cult files of the Federal Records of Existence. Most cult doctrines did not find any connection with this case. But in a religion called devil worship from Europe, there is a part that teaches believers how to transform their souls into demons after death to gain eternal life. One of the main requirements is to kill the 12 disciples of Jesus with your own hands and drink their blood. Luo An frowned slightly, not because he was scared by the content of devil worship, but because he really couldn't understand what was wrong with the brains of people who believed in this religion. However, there were still some questions that were not clarified, and Luo An continued to ask, what is the connection between the 12 disciples you mentioned and the 5 victims now? The occupation and name are the same. Taking a deep breath, Mona opened the laptop and explained, a zealot disciple named Simeon was sawed in half according to the records, which just corresponds to the name and occupation of Speaker Haman. 2 disciples whose names are translated as James were beaten to death and beheaded respectively, and their names and occupations correspond to church pastors and naval officers respectively. A disciple whose name is translated as Matthew was a tax collector and was hacked to death by a knife, which corresponds to the victim Matthew who worked in the tax department we just found. After listening to Mona's introduction, Luo An's mouth twitched. Did the 12 disciples of Jesus die so tragically? He then asked, what about the leather factory worker Bart's? Which disciple does he correspond to? A disciple named Bartholomew. Mona pulled down the computer screen and frowned. Bartholomew's translation is Bart, and his skin was peeled off when he was martyred. Luo An sighed helplessly. The names of the 12 disciples were not originally in English, and the translation into English was different from the original. He did not understand the content of Christianity, and the logic of the murderer's behavior could not be thought of at the moment. Mona was also helpless. They did not believe in religion. The entire Federation was dominated by Protestantism, and they had been exposed to Protestantism since childhood. The content of Protestantism emphasized the participation of individuals in churches, focusing on praise, teaching and prayer, and direct contact with God. There was not much content related to Jesus and the 12 disciples, which was basically only available in church schools. European Catholicism emphasizes rituals, sacraments, masses and communions, and contacts God through the church and Jesus, so most of the people in the Federation do not know the names, translations, and career experiences of the 12 saints. Just like the 72 sages of the East, most people know only 3 or 4 of them at most. Apart from students and experts in this field, most ordinary people don't know the names, occupations, and abilities of the remaining sages. Seeing that there was still some distance to the new crime scene, Luo An took out his mobile phone and called Morton York, the leader of the 4th investigation team, and asked directly, "Team leader Morton, have you found out the name and occupation of the victim?" Of course. At the crime scene, Morton York waved his hand to call over an agent under his command, took the information handed over by the other party and replied, "The victim's name is Thomas. He is 44 years old, works in a construction company, and is an architect. The victim died in the bathtub of the house. Not only was his tongue missing, but his right hand was also chopped off and missing. It should have been taken away by the murderer. The right hand was chopped off." Luo An's eyebrows moved, and he tilted his head to look at Mona. Mona in the co-pilot pulled down the computer screen, and after a few seconds, she whispered, "There is indeed one of the 12 disciples named Thomas. The Bible records that he did not believe in the resurrection of Jesus until he saw it with his own eyes and touched the wounds on Jesus' body with his hands. The murderer chopped off the victim's right hand, most likely because of this story." Luo An was silent for a few seconds, and then asked Morton York a few questions through the phone. Morton York answered them one by one, and finally asked, "How long will it take you to get here?" Roan turned the steering wheel hard at the intersection and drove the sub back to the direction of the FBI Los Angeles branch building. "I'm not going." Morton York. Roan laughed. Anyway, Morton York had gone to the crime scene with the trace examination department agents before. The on-site inspection work was handled by the trace examination department agents, and Roan and Mona went there just to check the situation at the scene. Originally, Roan went to the crime scene in the hope of finding the murderer's identity and reason for the crime through the clues left by the murderer at the scene. Now that the murderer's reason for committing the crime is known and confirmed, he can try to find the murderer's identity through the trace examination department's investigation of the scene. So there is no need for him and Mona to go to the scene. "Thank you for your hard work, Chief Morton." Luo An expressed his gratitude to Morton York, the leader of the 4th investigation team, with a smile on his face on the phone, and finally said, "After you return to the FBI Los Angeles branch building, I will send someone to your office area to hand over this case." "Thank you." Click. Hearing the busy tone on the phone, Morton York's face darkened. He originally planned to tease Luo An at the scene, but he didn't expect Luo An to simply not come. After a few seconds of silence, Morton York smiled. He was not angry about such a small matter, but he felt that Luo An was more and more interesting now. "You became the leader of the special investigation team at such a young age." Putting away the phone, Morton York waved his hand and called a subordinate agent over, saying, "Handle the scene well. When the special investigation team comes to take over the case, remember to give them everything about this case." Morton York no longer had the idea of tripping Luo An up. Cooperation and communication would benefit both parties, and he was not stingy in showing his goodwill first. On the other side, after Roan hung up Morton York, he immediately called the other members of the special investigation team. First, he asked them what the current investigation was, and second, he ordered them to return to the special investigation team. Mona's discovery just now had both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage was that they finally figured out the murderer's killing logic in this case. Based on the name and occupation, the special investigation team might be able to find other potential victims. The disadvantage was that there were 12 disciples of Jesus recorded in the Bible, and now 6 have died, leaving 6. Whether there are any dead among these 6 people, and how many dead, is a big question. After receiving Roan's call, a group of agents quickly returned to the special investigation team. Lassie and Winslow's group returned first, followed by Michelle, Anwar and Patricia's group. Then half an hour passed, and Cheney and Cooper had not returned yet. The phone also changed from being answered immediately to no one answering. Roan and a group of agents all looked gloomy. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.